This hearing of the Permanent Subcommittee investigations will come to order. I want to welcome everybody here. I appreciate your attendance in the audience. I certainly appreciate the time and effort that witnesses put into their testimony and their time coming here, traveling, and spending the afternoon with us. I would like to welcome Ranking Member Blumenthal, all the members, new and old. Senator Kim, thanks for showing up. To this, the first hearing of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations in the 119th Congress. I look forward to working with all of you as we conduct oversight investigations to uncover and expose the truth on issues that are important to the American people. My hope is our work will be largely nonpartisan. And I use that word specifically, nonpartisan. There should be nothing partisan about revealing the truth. That was this subcommittee's experience in the last Congress under Chairman Blumenthal, as we conducted bipartisan investigations into the assassination attempts on President Trump and the Coast Guard's cover-up of sexual abuse, and attempted to obtain information the government has withheld from the 9/11 families. In addition to the subcommittee's bipartisan record, its reputation for conducting thorough investigations spans decades. Since the 1940s, this subcommittee has been the epicenter of major congressional oversight efforts. I hope to use the subcommittee to build on that legacy by bringing much-needed transparency to the public, revealing the truth, and exposing wrongdoing. But it won't be easy. Wrongdoers are very good at covering their tracks, and we are already aware of allegations suggesting document destruction and purposeful evasion of FOIA. Quick little aside, I do want to tell members that, and members of the audience, this is not going to be a standard U.S. Senate hearing. I think it'll start out that way, but I was here early enough on the subcommittee with Senator Levin, for example. And Senator Levin would come with binders like we have of over 2,000 documents. But that was just his binder for the hearing, and they'd go all day long. This is about thorough investigation to uncover the truth. So again, I'm going to encourage the members, we'll have timing on the first round of questions, but if it's apparent that you're interested in this, if it's apparent that you've listened to the testimony, read the testimony, and you have more probing questions, I'll allow time to do it. Now, it'll be at my discretion, but I'll be, I think, very generous to serious types of questions. Now, the title of today's hearing is "The Corruption of Science in Federal Health Agencies: How Health Officials Downplayed and Hid Myocarditis and Other Adverse Events Associated with the COVID-19 Vaccines." I also want to take a moment to apologize, particularly to the vaccine injured, because I know there was an awful lot of expectation that as soon as I obtained this chairmanship that we'd be holding hearings immediately in January and February, and that was what my hope was. It didn't pan out that way because as dedicated as Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is to radical transparency in HHS, that's hard to achieve. And so it still has been difficult to get the documents. I think we finally got enough documents to certainly demonstrate in this case with myocarditis that the federal government was well aware of it, downplayed the severity, and hid what they had actually found. So again, that's what this hearing is about. That's what about the report that we're issuing in conjunction with this hearing is about. As chairman of the full committee, I held multiple hearings in the first year of the pandemic that opened my eyes to the capture and corruption of federal health agencies and scientific research. So much of our miserably failed response to COVID made no sense. Masking, devastating shutdowns, the sabotage of early treatment, rapid approval of remdesivir, and the maniacal reliance on the COVID-19 injections, and I use that word purposefully as well, injections, they're not standard vaccines, as the only way to end the pandemic. As ranking member of this subcommittee, I was unable to interest the subcommittee or full committee chairs in joining my oversight of our pandemic response. So instead of formal hearings, I held public events, giving those injured by the COVID-19 injection a platform to appeal to federal health officials and the public for help. I also provided opportunities for eminently qualified doctors and medical researchers who disagreed with our pandemic response to offer second opinions. More often than not, those who spoke up were vilified, censored, and suffered various forms of retribution and retaliation. Fortunately, the retaliation did not deter them, and they continued to speak out. Even better, they were joined by others. Some of those individuals are testifying today or are in the audience. I want to personally thank them for their courage and persistence. Today, I'm releasing an interim report that is based in large part on documents that were obtained by individuals who filed Freedom of Information FOIA requests over the last several years. These documents, obtained by reporters and private citizens, contain heavy redactions applied by the Biden administration. Yet, despite these obstructive efforts, these individuals initially raised awareness of Biden's administration's failure to immediately warn the public about myocarditis and other serious adverse events linked to the COVID-19 injections. I want to today credit the tenacious reporting of Brenda Bellotti, Ed Berkovich, Brian Hooker, Amy Kelly, Zachary Stieber, and Naomi Wolf. I know this hearing in particular was based on what we saw in the Pfizer papers and the 17-page talking points memo we'll talk about later. And again, that was the good work of Naomi Wolf and Amy Kelly and their crowdsourcing of the Pfizer papers. You know, how do you go through millions of pages? But I also want to thank the individuals associated with Act 19, the Informed Consent Action Network, ICANN, the book, The Pfizer Papers, as well as the reporters at Epoch Times, The Defender, Just the News, The Daily Clout, and many others who work persistently to expose the truth. Now, I actually have quite a bit longer opening statement, which I'll ask to be entered in the record. But what I want to do right now is, in a more succinct fashion, go through an abbreviated timeline as it relates to the myocarditis issue. Now, after facing 4 years of the Biden administration's efforts to undermine the public's access to information in my oversight work, I immediately issued a subpoena to HHS when I became chairman of this committee. The subpoena records I am releasing today, which are discussed in the interim report, do not contain FOIA redactions and will finally provide the public a more complete understanding of the Biden administration's awareness of the risks of myocarditis following COVID-19 injection. So now here's a brief timeline. On February 28, 2021, Israeli health officials notified CDC, quote, of large reports of myocarditis, particularly in young people following the administration of the Pfizer vaccine. Again, that's February 28, 2021, 2.5 months after the emergency use authorization. On April 12th, over a month later, a DOD consultant raises concerns to CDC and FDA officials about their ability to monitor and track cardiac-related adverse events. The consultant notes, quote, if you do not ask, you will not see it. But does that mean it does not exist, unquote. Around the same time, in mid-April 2021, CDC officials discussed safety signals for myocarditis, quote, for myocarditis with mRNA vaccines, based on DOD and Israeli data, but do not take immediate steps to warn the public. By the end of April 2021, just 4 months into the COVID injection, VAERS was already reporting 2,926 deaths worldwide within 30 days of injection, with 46% of those deaths occurring on days 0, 1, or 2 following injection. Now, I have the first chart I ever did on this, which I presented in our event in Milwaukee with the COVID injection injured. That chart, a couple months later, is showing, I think, 30-some%. I can't see it from that far away, but let me get out mine. That chart is showing, at that time, a couple months later, 4,812 deaths, 1,736, or 36% of those deaths occurring within the day of injection or within 1 or 2 days. Now, I was raising that issue. I was going on media. I was showing this chart, and I got censored. Radio talk show hosts, when I talked about this, they were deplatformed. Now, again, I realize VAERS doesn't prove causation. I realize it's grossly underreported, but that's a correlation that I thought was pretty important. Somebody ought to be looking at it. So when I finally had a meeting with Francis Collins, head of NIH, with a group of other senators, I asked him, are you watching VAERS? I gave him those stats. He did admit that 6 deaths were associated with the J&J vaccine, but for the other over a few thousand deaths, he said, Senator, people die. That was his callous reaction. That was the head of the NIH completely blowing off the VAERS system that they had touted before they got the emergency use authorization. I'll continue. From May 17th to May 21, 2021, CDC officials discuss whether to issue a formal health warning called a Health Alert Network message on myocarditis, noting that, quote, providers aren't reporting these cases to VAERS. They knew they weren't. They knew they existed. They knew they weren't reporting them. A couple days later, during a May 24, 2021 vaccine safety meeting, notes show that FDA and CDC officials asked, quote, is VAERS signaling for myocarditis now? Question mark, and are told for the age groups 16 to 17 years and 18 to 24 years, yes. Yes, they saw a safety signal in VAERS, yet from May 25th to May 27th, CDC officials provide up-to-date information on the status of the HAN to Pfizer and Moderna representatives. Not to the public, they're warning the injection manufacturers, indicating CDC's preference to keep those companies more informed about vaccine adverse events than the American people. On May 26th, then FDA Acting Commissioner Janet Woodcock emails then CDC Director Rochelle Walensky noting that, quote, FDA does not concur with the issuance of the myocarditis HAN as written. The same day, CDC and FDA decide to, quote, nix the HAN and instead publish less formal clinical, quote, clinical considerations about myocarditis on CDC website. 3 days following the myocarditis signal, FDA official Peter Marks appears to raise concerns about even posting the less formal clinical considerations on CDC's website. He emails Woodcock and Walensky, quote, I need to ask for your patience with me. We still have concerns here if myocarditis and pericarditis have not actually signaled. That same day, CDC officials editing the clinical considerations discussed the need to, quote, walk back a sentence advising doctors to, quote, consider restricting patients with myocarditis from rigorous activity like competitive sports for at least 3 months until cleared by healthcare professionals. And I'll be talking to Dr. McCullough about the danger of eliminating that warning because 4 days later, CDC posts on its website clinical considerations about myocarditis, which omits any advice to doctors to advise patients with myocarditis to limit rigorous activity. That's what's in this report in far greater detail. So I would ask that that information, together with my majority staff report, 2,473 pages of records HHS has produced pursuant to my January 28, 25 subpoena and my actual subpoena. I want those entered into the record. And with that, I'll turn over to Ranking Member Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this first hearing of our Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. I think we all agree that this hearing and our efforts in this subcommittee ought to be nonpartisan and non-political, and that we should depoliticize science, strictly adhere to the evidence, medical evidence, without resort to ideological predilection, and that there ought to be warnings about side effects from any medicine, and that the warning should be as prompt as possible. I think we can all agree on that fact, and that there ought to be very rigorous review of any kind of medical treatment by the FDA to make sure it's safe and effective before it's used in the public. But I want to take us back to January of 2021. I know it's hard to recall the sense of real fear during the worst of the pandemic. More than 20,000 Americans died from coronavirus each week. I remember seeing pictures of people who were in the hospital on gurneys because there was inadequate space for them in the hospital. The morgues overflowed. And we were looking to some way to stop the spread and the deep-seated pervasive fear. During the worst week of the pandemic, more than 25,000 Americans died. That was during the last week of President Trump's term of office. Not only were hospitals overwhelmed, but non-urgent procedures were postponed, and doctors and nurses were working around the clock, in fact, putting themselves at risk. Those healthcare providers, to this day, are among my heroes in this story as patients filled the hallways. As we talk about the side effects of COVID vaccines, I think we need to be clear about the most important fact for all Americans. COVID-19 vaccines have saved millions and millions of lives. There is no scientific question about that fact. They save lives. In the past 5 years, more than 1.2 million Americans have lost their lives to COVID-19. That's 1.2 million parents, children, friends, and loved ones. And we all know someone who has perished as a result of COVID-19. But when the vaccines became widely available in 2021, deaths sharply declined, and many lives have been saved in the years since. Many in this room, speaking for myself as well as others, probably have been saved from this disease because of those vaccines. One study found that 3 million American deaths were averted. 18 million hospitalizations were avoided, and $1 trillion in healthcare costs were saved in the United States in just the first 2 years after COVID vaccines were distributed. I'd like this study entered into the record, Mr. Chairman, if there's no objection.
No objection.
Now, vaccines not only saved American lives, they enabled us to get back on our feet economically. They enabled the American economy to recover. Let's try to think of where we were 5 years ago with a deadly, unknown virus spreading through America and through the world. We were only able to come so far because of the vaccines and the researchers who developed them and the public health officials who distribute them. And now those individuals are again under attack, our public health officials. I've looked at those documents, maybe not all of them, that the majority alleges show that the Biden administration or those public health officials suppressed evidence of side effects. Let's be clear, the allegation is that they purposefully concealed evidence. I am unable to support that conclusion with this evidence. In fact, the primary piece of evidence for this claim is that the CDC did not issue a notice on its Health Alert Network, HON, in May 2021 while it was still analyzing the evidence about myocarditis. We're talking about myocarditis. The chairman has referenced other side effects. I'm not sure what he means. But what I see as I look at that evidence is public health officials wrestling with what to do and what kind of warning to issue. And again, side effects must be studied and communicated. And that's what I see happening in these documents that the majority has released. So we have to distinguish, I think, between differences of opinion under the pressure of a pandemic and separate the opinions of scientists who are working for the greater good and, frankly, others who may simply be seeking to sow distrust while they profit off misinformation and fear. And I'm, frankly, deeply concerned about some of today's witnesses because they have a financial interest in fomenting distrust about COVID-19 vaccines and pushing untested alternative remedies. over proven treatments. In fact, two of today's witnesses are executives at something called the Wellness Company, which sells the disproven treatment, ivermectin, and a host of untested supplements, which include something called, quote, unquote, Ultimate Spike Detox, costs $89.99 a bottle. Another makes money from suing vaccine companies, and still others are pushing unsupported research while rejecting the proven scientists on COVID and other vaccines. Let's be very clear that fear-mongering and rushing to conclusions without examining the evidence can lead to tremendous harm, and this risk is not just hypothetical or rhetorical. Misinformation about the safety of vaccines has led to a deadly outbreak of a preventable disease. We all know it, measles. Just 25 years ago, measles was declared eliminated in the United States. Since then, conspiracy theories, some financially motivated, have caused vaccination rates to plummet. Last September, the CDC warned that declining childhood vaccination could lead to a resurgence of a preventable disease like measles and rotavirus, exactly what is happening today. As of today, more than 1,000 Americans have been diagnosed with measles this year in 31 states, many of them children. So far, 3 have died. These deaths were preventable. They could have been avoided, but for the efforts of misinformation proponents that have spread lies and created fears. There has been so much misinformation and fear since COVID-19 emerged that during the height of the pandemic, healthcare workers and public health officials were often harassed and threatened. Some of them continue to fear for their lives. During the first frightening year of the pandemic, the Trump administration withheld critical information from the public, made baseless promises that the virus would magically disappear. I think I'm almost quoting the president. Magically disappear, engaged in unfounded conspiracy theories and sham science about COVID-19 treatments, and sowed the seeds of distrust in public health institutions. And then, to the tremendous credit of President Trump, he fast-tracked the vaccine. Let me repeat, to the credit of the Trump administration, the President of the United States fast-tracked the vaccine and saved lives. We need to learn from history. We're seeing the same pattern now. Those same seeds of doubt and distrust have been nurtured by the president's choices for key positions in this administration, including the decision to install a well-known vaccine skeptic as the head of HHS and to fill our public health agencies with conspiracists. And let's bring it right to the present day. Just yesterday, it was announced that the FDA may start restricting access to new COVID boosters to those over 65 or with a narrow set of pre-existing conditions. Now, we ought to be very frank here. Discerning what exactly this new guidance may be at the moment is confusing. And the troubling news leaves many questions unanswered about whether and how people can actually access vaccines if they want to do so. Will Americans who live with elderly or immunocompromised relatives, for example, have access to these vaccines? We don't know. And so far, those questions are unanswered. The manner and timing of this decision, frankly, reek of politics, not science. And again, science ought to be the lodestar. So I think we need to be looking at the present. We need to be looking forward. In the first 4 months since the president took office, he and his health secretary have fired at least 10,000 employees from public health agencies and cut more than $2.7 billion in funding for research, including $4.2 million for vaccine clinical trials. Let me repeat, clinical trials, money cut to do them. How does that make us safer? More than $3.8 million for safety monitoring, and more than $2 billion for state immunization programs, a drastic cut that is already hampering our measles response. These reckless cuts are undermining our ability to respond, not just to measles, but to what may come next. And we all know something will come next. That's the history. We need to learn from history and science. Let me just finish by saying the capacity of our agencies to warn is compromised by these cuts. The capacity of our agencies to do science and rely on science is compromised when we cut 10,000 people from the ranks of the agencies responsible for safety. And so I welcome the interest in this topic. I'm honored that the governor of Hawaii, Dr. Josh Green, has joined us today to share his experiences addressing both measles and COVID-19. He's not only a dedicated public service, but he's also a physician who led his state, Hawaii, during the pandemic. And I'm thankful to him for being here today. And I look forward to the testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. I think people understand why you didn't join me in my oversight request. There's over 70 letters that were not responded to. Again, I haven't uncovered yet what they were trying to hide, but our intention is to do so. You did mention the irrefutable fact that these injections save lives. I would enter into the record a recent study by Raphael Lataster, who does a pretty effective job of rebutting one of those studies from Watson et al. But put in the record, and again, will allow the public, the American people who are watching this hearing, decide based on what testimony is, based on what's been entered in the record, based on our report. It is the custom of this, the full committee and the subcommittee, to swear in witnesses. So if you all rise and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give before the subcommittee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please be seated. Our first witness is Dr. Peter McCullough. Dr. McCullough is an internist, cardiologist, and epidemiologist from Dallas, Texas. He is broadly published with over 700 citations in the National Library of Medicine. He has testified multiple times in the U.S. Senate, U.S. House of Representatives, European Parliament, and many state capitals concerning public health policy. Dr. McCullough.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Blumenthal, subcommittee members, it's an honor to present my insights, my analysis, my clinical experience on this very important topic. The first time I testified at Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, before a word came out of my mouth, Minority Senator Gary Peters said, what America was about to hear was misinformation. I didn't even know what he was talking about. I had never heard that term before in academic medicine or in important deliberations. That's November 19th, 2020. What was he doing? He was using an old communist propaganda technique. He was attempting to gain leverage over me before a word ever came out of my mouth. We should never have our public servants ever try to gain leverage over anyone who is coming to Washington to help the nation on an important issue. As introduced, I'm an internist, I'm a cardiologist. I believe I'm the most published individual who's ever testified on matters related to COVID-19 in any of these hearings. I've seen and examined more patients. I've examined more data, and I'm one of the most published people on the topic in the world. And as a cardiologist, I can tell you, my role in this was to fight disease, preserve life, and above all, do no harm. Do no harm. Now, the topic today is myocarditis or heart damage from the COVID-19 vaccines. I'm a cardiologist. I know the topic well. I've examined thousands of patients with this problem. Thousands. Before the pandemic, I had 2 patients ever with this problem. There's 1,065 papers in the peer-reviewed literature on COVID vaccine myocarditis. So let me summarize them for you. The first one that came on my radar screen that was alarming came from Washington University in St. Louis, August 18th of 2021. The first author is Verma and colleagues, New England Journal of Medicine. 42-year-old man comes into Washington University Hospital with vaccine myocarditis. The infection is ruled out. It's the vaccine. He's in the hospital. This is one of our best hospitals in the United States. He dies 3 days after taking Moderna. They can't save him in the hospital.
Say, Dr. McCullough, move the microphone just a little bit away from you.
Then one was reported from Korea by Choi and colleagues. This is now a younger man, just a few days after Pfizer. He comes in the hospital. He dies within 8 hours of being in the hospital. I can tell you, I'm a cardiologist. That doesn't even happen with heart attacks. He dies within 8 hours. I examined all of the slides and the images that the Koreans had showed us. It looked like somebody took a blowtorch to that heart. It was so completely fried with inflammation. His heart was destroyed. These cases, which were widely known at the time, should have gotten everyone's attention. Everyone should have been laser focused on this. We should never have someone die after taking a vaccine. That's directly caused to the vaccine. Then Gill and colleagues, Connecticut, published in Archives of Pathology. 2 boys, aged 16 and 17, who die a few days after taking Pfizer. These are teenagers. They're found dead at home by their parents. They're absolutely horrified. They request an autopsy. They call in University of Michigan and University of Minnesota to look over what are they finding at autopsy. Conclusion, it's Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine myocarditis, unequivocal. These are autopsy-confirmed cases. So for all the mothers in the room, how would they feel if they found their children dead after taking a COVID-19 vaccine? This is in the peer-reviewed literature. This is not misinformation. Everyone should be paying attention to this. This is not conjecture. This is in the peer-reviewed literature. So we started to ask ourselves, what is going on? Turns out that Pfizer and Moderna and Janssen are the genetic code for the spike protein. The spike protein is the damaging part of the virus. The spike protein is loaded into the body and it causes tremendous damage in some. Acute myocarditis appears to have some genetic predilection, and all of the vials of the vaccine are not the same. But I can tell you, I'm concerned that until the vaccines are stopped, there will be cases of acute myocarditis. And to finish, we've had 216 vaccine deaths this year alone. So if the vaccine campaign continues, we have to look at what are we getting out of it now, 4.5 years of the campaign, and how many more people will die. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. McCullough. Our next witness is Dr. Jordan Vaughn. Dr. Vaughn is a physician and clinical researcher in Birmingham, Alabama. As owner and CEO of MedHelp Clinics, Dr. Vaughn has directed his organization to the leading edge of early outpatient treatment of COVID-19 for his patients and greater Birmingham community. Dr. Vaughn has treated over 4,000 long COVID and COVID vaccine injured patients. Dr. Vaughn.
Thank you. Chairman Johnson and Ranking Member Blumenthal, thank you for having me. I'm going to dovetail a little bit off what Dr. McCullough said. And one of the things that, as a clinician who also had about 200 people working for him and actually seeing about 170,000 patients a year, when COVID came along, I had to really figure out how to not only help my staff and make sure they're safe, but also help the patients that my organization was responsible for. And that really made me dive into understanding the pathology. And what I came away with was understanding that the spike protein, the S1 subunit specifically, is not a benign protein. It triggers inflammation, it disrupts endothelial barriers, it induces fibrin resistant to breakdown, and it promotes a lot of amyloid aggregates, which is what I research. These effects impair oxygen delivery, damage blood vessels, contribute to clotting pathologies that manifest with a lot of the symptoms that we're seeing in the long COVID and vaccine injured, which to this day is a huge amount of people. We're talking upwards of 10 to 15 million people in America that are being affected by the consequences of COVID in the long form or vaccine injury. And the typical symptoms are things like heart racing, brain fog, shortness of breath, and post-exertional malaise. In my clinic, I actually use immunofluorescent microscopy to be able to actually see what's going on in the blood and look for these amyloid aggregates. Some as young as teenagers that are unable to stand. Others are previously active adults suffering small strokes without typical identifiable causes. These are not abstract theories. They are the lived realities of my patients in Alabama and beyond. The mRNA injection, heralded as a solution, introduced a novel mechanism, lipid nanoparticles delivering modified mRNA that instructs the cells to produce a stabilized spike protein. Unlike traditional vaccines, this approach resulted in uncontrolled production of the spike protein for an unknown duration and distributes it widely across organs, including the heart, brain, and vasculature, and ovaries and testes. The actual EMA, their assessment of Comirnaty, which is Pfizer's vaccine, noted biodistribution beyond the injection site, contradicting claims that the vaccine stays in the arm. And a recent groundbreaking study using single-cell precision nanocarrier identification revealed LNP accumulation in the heart tissue of mice with adverse proteomic changes in immune and vascular proteins, raising concerns about the cardiac complications that dovetail with what we were seeing when we were looking at the COVID-19 vaccine myocarditis. I will tell my first encounter with a vaccine injury came in winter of 2021. 69-year-old man from Alabama presented with unexplained shortness of breath. He was a patient of mine. He really had no other reason that he had this shortness of breath. And after the second Pfizer dose, he actually had significant shortness of breath. I couldn't figure it out in a sense because it would typically be that he had a pulmonary embolism, but empirical anticoagulation and antiplatelet therapy brought rapid improvement. This case prompted deeper investigation that the spike protein's ability to induce fibrin that's resistant to breakdown, activate platelets irreversibly, and damage the inside of our vessels that run to every part of our body and every organ, explained his symptoms and those of thousands more since. I have treated approximately 4,000 patients suffering from long COVID and vaccine injury, or both. Many were young and previously healthy. For those with vaccine injury, trust in public institutions has been shattered. Many were coerced under the August 2021 federal mandates, despite legitimate hesitations due to prior infection or personal health risks. They knew their body better than the agencies. Now disabled, they are dismissed or ignored by the systems that mandated their compliance. The myocarditis signal was also a big thing. This spring of 2021, a clear safety signal emerged. Myocarditis in young males linked to mRNA vaccines. The Department of Defense confirmed cases of rare heart inflammation, and peer-reviewed studies later detected circulating spike protein in post-vaccine myocarditis cases. Autopsy findings have confirmed fatal vaccine-induced myocarditis. Yet federal authorities accelerated licensing and mandates, sidelining concerns. The CDC's hesitation to issue a health alert on myocarditis, and the FDA's former CBER director promoting vaccines on social media crossed a line from oversight to advocacy. This was not regulation, it was endorsement. Informed consent is the foundation of a patient-physician relationship. Absent the regulators providing that information, that relationship is irreparably harmed, and the practice of medicine will continue to suffer. In closing, I urge you to stop blindly following the science. Science does not lead anywhere. It is an observer, measurer, and descriptor. It must inform leadership, not replace it. When leaders hide behind the science to justify policy, they abdicate responsibility. We need leadership that humbly engages with data, listens to patients, and actually acts with courage. Thank you. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Vaughn. Next witness is Dr. James Thorp. Dr. Thorp is a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist and maternal fetal medicine specialist with over 44 years of clinical experience. As U.S. veteran and widely published physician, he has testified internationally, served as a journal peer reviewer, board member of the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, and examiner for the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology. Dr. Thorp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My patients, I focus on the most vulnerable patients, pregnant women and preborn. It is difficult to conceive of a more egregious breach of medical ethics by the government-controlled medical industrial complex than the promotion of COVID-19 vaccines to pregnant women, thereby, through transplacental transfer, effectively vaccinating their unborn and newborn children. This campaign was not accidental. It was calculated. Pregnant women were targeted deliberately for two reasons. First, women are the primary decision makers of healthcare across the human lifespan, a known marketing principle. Number two, pregnant women are the most vulnerable patients. If they could be convinced that the vaccine was safe and effective, it would imply that it was safe and effective for everyone. From the outset of the pandemic, this vaccine campaign was never grounded in biological science, but rather in behavioral science, specifically the manipulation of public perception through influence, fear, and persuasion. The federal government outsourced much of this psychological operations to NGOs which disseminated emotionally charged and misleading messaging. These entities falsely assured pregnant women that the vaccines were proven safe and essential for maternal and fetal newborn health, despite the fact that early evidence indicated quite the opposite. Pregnancy itself was protective against COVID-19 maternal mortality. Dr. Jay Winston, an initiative director at Harvard School of Public Health, described the government's vaccine marketing approach in a 2020 CBS News interview. He explained that the strategy was to, quote, go for the low-hanging fruit, those easiest to pick and harvest, end quote. And the fruit, in quotes, tragically, were pregnant women. Only this deception was institutionalized in the now infamous Shimabukuro study published on April 21st, 2021 in the digital version of the New England Journal of Medicine. 21 authors claimed the miscarriage rate was 12.6%, but the raw data revealed an 82% miscarriage rate in women vaccinated during the first trimester. This figure mirrors the effects of chemical abortion drugs such as RU-486. Also, in the same journal edition, on the same day, an op-ed appeared by CDC Director Rochelle Walensky and journal editor-in-chief Eric Rubin. These publications were riddled with conflicts of interest and deliberate misrepresentations intended to coerce pregnant women into taking vaccines. Subsequent studies have also claimed that COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective during pregnancy and have been rebuked by respected researchers. These publications are fundamentally compromised by serious conflicts of interest, ranging from biased funding sources and institutional mandates, and even threats to their medical licenses and board certifications. Between 2020 and 2022, pharmaceutical companies paid $1.06 billion to reviewers at leading medical journals, the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, Lancet, and BMJ, thus corrupting the peer review process. At least 6 existing studies, 3 from CDC, FDA, and 2 from Pfizer, revealed major breaches in safety signals for COVID-19 vaccines and pregnancy. These findings were ignored. Conversely, countless independent researchers with no conflicts of interest published findings that contradicted the false narratives and the pharmaceutical industry narratives, only to be rewarded by persecution, censorship, and threats to their medical licenses and board certifications. This is not hypothetical. It happened to me. On February 8, 2025, our team of researchers published a peer-reviewed study in Science, Public Health Policy, and the Law. We identified 37 adverse pregnancy outcomes significantly associated with COVID-19 vaccine, including miscarriage, stillbirth, birth defects, cervical insufficiency, premature rupture of membranes, preterm birth, and death of the newborn. Lin and colleagues in a major journal publication documented that the COVID-19 vaccine traverses the placenta, enters the fetal blood, and bioactively produces spike protein in the placenta and the lining of the uterus. Recently, animal studies revealed the mRNA COVID vaccine causes the destruction of 60% of the ovarian reserve in rats. This catastrophic public health failure was financed with taxpayer dollars and channeled through federal agencies to medical gatekeepers such as the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, ACOG, the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology, ABOG, and the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, SMFM. These organizations have abandoned their ethics and responsibilities to physicians and patients and must be held accountable. I urge the government to immediately halt all funding to these entities and to end every promotional campaign that coerces or recommends experimental mRNA therapies to pregnant women. This must stop now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thorp. Our next witness is Dr. Joel Walscog. Dr. Walscog is an orthopedic surgeon originally from Wisconsin. He experienced an adverse event after his Moderna COVID-19 injection that he received on December 30th, 2020. He has subsequently been diagnosed with transverse myelitis, an unspecified autoimmune disorder, and autonomic dysfunction. He is medically retired. He is now co-chairman of REACT 19. Dr. Walscog.
Thank you, Senator Johnson, Senator Blumenthal, and the subcommittee for inviting me to testify on the development and safety of the COVID-19 vaccines. I am Joel Walscog, a board-certified orthopedic surgeon, now medically disabled after one dose of the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. Before the pandemic, I enjoyed a successful practice in Wisconsin, performing over 800 major surgeries annually. Trusting my health authorities, my practice followed CDC COVID-19 guidelines, delaying surgeries, and even temporarily closing. I proudly elected to get vaccinated, and within a week, I developed leg weakness, numbness, substantial balance loss, leading to falls, including one while treating a patient. Diagnosed with transverse myelitis, a spinal cord lesion at T8, T9, I was stunned that my providers dismissed any vaccine link, despite news of similar cases halting the AstraZeneca trial in the UK. 4 years later, while I can walk, I have been diagnosed with dysautonomia and an undefined autoimmune disorder, both debilitating conditions affecting multiple body systems. I remain medically retired. The career I loved and worked so hard for is now gone. In 2021, federal health agencies assured Americans that the COVID-19 vaccine trials were rigorous and closely monitored with rigorous post-marketing surveillance. They also claimed a robust safety net that would handle what they said were rare and mostly mild injuries with monitoring, follow-up, and financial aid. After my own vaccine injury, I learned the hard way that nothing could be farther from the truth. In my own battle to restore my health, I could not find a single reliable source of information from the CDC, from the FDA, or the NIH. Further, answers did not come from medical teams, the media, or even medical journals. Rather, the answers were being pieced together by tens of thousands of vaccine-injured patients, huddled together in social media-based support groups who are constantly fighting for their right to simply exist. You will hear today a great deal about myocarditis, maternal fetal complications, and blood clotting disorders after the COVID-19 shots. I hope to talk more about the neurological adverse events to the COVID vaccines. These are the most common adverse event to the COVID shots. I am now co-chair of React 19, which is a national, science-based, non-political, nonprofit that represents over 36,000 Americans seriously injured by the COVID-19 shots. Our mission is to provide financial, physical, and emotional support. This gives me a unique perspective to share the collective experience of those who have been harmed, not just by the COVID-19 vaccines themselves, but also by the U.S. government. React 19 surveyed our 36,000 members, asking if the FDA takes vaccine injuries seriously. 100% said false. Not even one person voted favorably. The vaccine injured share a uniform story. We did our duty for our country, became injured, disabled, or died. We further reported to VAERS and vSafe, repeatedly contacted our elected officials and applied to the Countermeasures Injury Compensation Program, or CICP, only to face silence from the VAERS, no response from vSafe, ghosting by our own representatives, and a 98% rejection rate from the CICP. The many cries for help were ignored. Some were studied at the NIH in a program under Dr. Fauci, where they were diagnosed with vaccine complications, but never disclosed to the public, despite promises that the NIH would do so. Privately, the agencies said neurological conditions needed early recognition and treatment, while publicly they remained silent and often denying that they were even treating vaccine injuries. Rather, they promoted boosters and high safety claims, while the White House directed social media to censor, quote, true stories of vaccine injury, end quote. Relegating NIH confirmed injuries into silence. That silence by health authorities, elected representatives, and even our White House has resulted in even more severe health outcomes and worse for many, death. The PrEP Act shields drug companies from injury liability and strips Americans of their constitutional right to due process and jury trial. This liability shield places the responsibility squarely on the U.S. government to address this crisis. Our constitutional rights must be replaced with effective safety monitoring and compensation. Today, these programs are dismal failures. Congress must urgently reform these failing systems or remove itself as a middleman and repeal the PrEP Act. An analysis of clinical trial data showed that for every 800 people vaccinated, one suffers a serious adverse event. We are here today to end the silence for the 1 in 800. It is time to stop politicizing vaccine injuries and start building meaningful recognition, research, competent care, and fair and just compensation. At React 19, we say we've had negative reactions, but we're about seeking positive actions. I will not stop until these humanitarian goals are met. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Walscog. Our next witness is Mr. Aaron Siri. Ms. Siri is the managing partner of Siri in Glimstad with over 85 professionals. He has handled numerous high-profile cases involving challenges to medical mandates, restoring exemptions, agency transparency, including forcing FDA to release the COVID-19 vaccine licensure documents, and deposing immunologists, infectious disease doctors, and vaccinologists. Mr. Siri.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Our vaccine practice, I believe, which has over 40 professionals, it doesn't represent pharmaceutical companies, I believe is the largest vaccine practice in the world. When we litigate vaccine cases, we cannot rely on credentials or fancy titles. We have to prove our claims with high-impact data and sources. For example, I saw a slide put up that showed 3 million lives were saved from COVID-19 vaccines. The citation to it was to the Commonwealth Fund. If you follow that, that's not a peer-reviewed study. That's a blog. It's a blog that used a mathematical model to calculate that 3 million lives were saved. So I agree with the Senator Blumenthal that who said, quote, claims made, I think you meant regarding vaccines, we need to examine the evidence. And that's an example of that. We need to look carefully at the evidence we are relying upon when we are making claims about vaccines. I don't think that if I went into court and I was relying on a blog that used a mathematical model, I would be laughed out of court if I was making those claims about vaccines. But unfortunately, when it comes to promoting vaccines, well, that's what we often see. The underlying data is not typically really carefully evaluated. Claims about what vaccines do when they're positive, because our health agencies are responsible for promoting them, easily made. Claims that vaccines cause any harms or injuries often get ignored no matter how good the underlying data. I also heard that deaths sharply declined in 2021. Well, when you look at all-cause mortality in the United States, deaths in 2021 went up compared to 2020, and presumably most of the most frail, the weak among us died in 2020 from COVID. We should have had a reduction in all-cause mortality in the United States. We did not. And those numbers you can't argue with. They're binary. You're either dead or you're alive. You can argue whether the vaccine killed you or didn't kill you, whether COVID killed you or didn't kill you. But it can't argue with all-cause mortality. And we did not have a reduction in all-cause mortality in 2021. We had an increase. And we really need to answer that question. We have sent many letters to our federal health officials trying to get an answer to that. With that said, not only do we need to carefully study the data and science before we go and litigate our vaccine cases, because again, I don't have a MD or a PhD or an MPH, we also need to understand the economic and regulatory framework around vaccines. And COVID-19 vaccines did not just fall into a vacuum. They fell into a very well-developed regulatory and economic framework for vaccines that has developed over the last 40 years. For every product on the market, you can sue the manufacturer for harm, for design defect claims, meaning the claim that the product could have made safer. I mean, literally, look around this room, planes, cars, pharmaceutical drugs, every one. There's only one product in America. You cannot sue the manufacturer for design defect claim to claim that it could have been made safer, and that are vaccines. I heard, injections, vaccines. My definition of vaccine is any product for which the government needs to give it immunity from harms. To me, that's what a vaccine is, because some prevent infection, some don't. That's what a vaccine is, meaning it can't survive without that immunity, apparently. Why did vaccines get this immunity, which was provided in 1986 under the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act? Because leading up to 86, there were only 3 routine childhood vaccines, MMR, OPV, and DTP, and they were causing so much harm and causing so much liability that all the manufacturers were going out of business to stop making them. And Congress, instead of forcing those manufacturers to do what every other product manufacturer needs to do in that situation, which is what? Make a better, safer product. Instead said, you know what? We're just going to give you immunity. We're going to make it so nobody can sue you for those harms. And you can keep selling your product to the American public no matter how many children it kills or injures. And the issue is that immunity was not just given for those 3 products. It was given for any childhood vaccine, routine child vaccine that was developed thereafter. I tell you this not to take issue with childhood vaccines, but to explain to you the regulatory framework in which vaccines have developed over the last 40 years. We have now gone from 3 injections in the first year of life under the CDC schedule in 86 to 29 injections, including in utero, if a child follows the CDC schedule today. Every one of those vaccines, save one, was developed by a pharmaceutical company knowing they would not be responsible for the injuries that are caused by those products. So when you have drug trials where pharmaceutical companies, they care about losing money, they don't want to lose money on their drugs, they often do multi-year placebo-controlled trials before they get on the market because they don't want to end up upside down. They're there to make money. But with vaccine products, because they don't have that financial incentive, they have the disincentive. Almost every childhood vaccine in this country is licensed based on clinical trials with no placebo control, save for COVID-19 vaccine, often days or weeks, up to maybe 6 months of safety review after injection, and are often extremely underpowered. Those trials could never have really confirmed the safety of this product, and my submission to this committee laid out every single vaccine and put them in detail. I will, since I'm running out of time, I'll just wrap up by saying this. You might say, well, okay, the pharmaceutical companies did that, but why would the FDA allow it? It's because, unfortunately, our federal health authorities are hopelessly conflicted. Congress gave them conflicting structural duties. They're responsible for promoting vaccines and for defending them in the Vaccine Compensation Program. And you also ask them to be responsible for safety. Those conflict. One has overtaken the other. And for the most part, based on our over 2,004 requests to federal health agencies over the years on behalf of our client, I could tell you, our federal health agencies act like partners with pharma. They encourage their inroads. They act basically in the shoes of pharma because when the immunity to liability was given to the pharmaceutical companies, Congress recognized that apparently and transferred all the safety functions to HHS and the mandate for safer childhood vaccines. And by doing so, it's made them hopelessly conflicted. That was a very, very quick way to try and convey the regulatory and economic framework into which COVID-19 vaccines fell into, and why, from the pharmaceutical and FDA's perspective, the COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials may have been robust, and they were compared to childhood vaccines, but compared to drugs or anybody that actually wants to assess safety, they absolutely were not robust. They were incredibly anemic. And as for post-licensure, regulators didn't do their jobs, but really they acted like pharmaceutical companies seeking to cover up harms and avoid reputational damage and financial liability. I hope this hearing can help begin the process of changing that. Thank you, and I apologize for going over on my time.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Siri. Our final witness is Governor and Doctor. I've always found senators like to be called doctor, if they are one. So Governor and Dr. Josh Green. Governor Green is the 9th governor of Hawaii. He earned his degrees in biology and anthropology from Swarthmore College and an MD from Penn State's College of Medicine. Dr. Green served 2 terms in the Hawaii House of Representatives, 3 terms in the Hawaii State Senate, and a term as lieutenant governor, during which he was the state's point person addressing the COVID pandemic. Dr. Green was elected governor in December 2022. Governor Green.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. Thank you so much for welcoming me. Thank you, Ranking Member Blumenthal. Thank you, Senators. First of all, I'm coming to you as a physician. When I speak as a doctor, I'm here to say that vaccines save lives, period. I care about saving lives. You care about saving lives. Everyone in this room, I believe, cares about saving lives. But I've seen firsthand children dying from the spread of preventable diseases because of vaccine skepticism, because people lose faith. I've seen the lives of some children in one house who are vaccinated live, while children in the house next door who have not been vaccinated die. And we saw a lot of this during COVID. I want to tell you a little bit about my COVID experience as the COVID liaison in my state, a state of 1.4 million people. And let me preface this by saying we worked very closely with President Trump and his team. And then subsequently, as Lieutenant Governor, I was able to work very closely with President Biden and his team, and I appreciate them both. I appreciate that President Trump, using Operation Warp Speed, got us a vaccination in an extraordinary time. We were desperate as healthcare providers. I worked as an emergency room physician virtually every single weekend for 20 plus years, including through the whole pandemic. And this is what I saw. I saw people dying of terrible disease when they caught the Delta variant of COVID especially. I saw people recover better when they had been vaccinated. In Hawaii, we had the lowest mortality rate in the country. We had the highest vaccination rate in the country. People have asked me in the course of the prep for this hearing, well, is Hawaii safer because it's a tropical island state? No, actually, it's quite the contrary. We had COVID coming from east in Asia, where it originated, and west, travelers from the mainland. But we put together programs based on science. Day by day, I counted case after case after case because there was so much uncertainty. And I was able to share in our state where we had infectious disease doctors, where we had extra need for ventilators, where we had extra need for vaccinations, where the rates were lower. And day by day, working with all the healthcare providers in my state and listening to others, not mandating. I'm not a mandate guy. That may come as a surprise to some today. We were able to make sure that we had a science-based response. We put together a safe travels program which tested anyone coming into the islands so that they wouldn't travel or that they would isolate, quarantine if they were positive so they wouldn't spread the disease. And over time, we had the experience that no one else had. We saw death rates constantly lower than all the other states with the single exception of Vermont on occasion. I tell you this because we have to follow science, and I truly believe that we can't politicize science or vaccinations or any of these public health matters, and it's very important going forward. This is where we should unite with one another. We should heal our country together in this space. Now, another experience I had, measles. I was the doctor that was asked to go to Samoa when they had their outbreak of measles. Why did they have their outbreak? Because they lost faith in the vaccination program. And it was tragic. The Children's Health Defense went there and they scared people. After tragedy, admittedly, it should have never happened. I had children die in my arms who were not vaccinated but died of measles. This beautiful boy was with me and a pediatrician. Dr. Nadine Tansala had a terrible case of the measles, and some of his relatives passed away from the disease. But we went there and we vaccinated 37,000 individuals in 48 hours, and the measles just stopped. And I say this because this is what we have to look forward to in the future if we somehow fall into a place where we don't believe in vaccinations any longer. And we shouldn't do it blindly. We should study them. We should check for safety. Absolutely, that is essential in science. But these vaccinations save lives. They saved many lives during COVID. In my state, they saved over 10,000 lives. We anticipated mass casualties, which we never saw because we fought this disease with great intelligence and great acumen. I will tell you this. There are lots of things to share today. Protests resonated through the COVID experience in my state. People protested at my home, around my family. But the leader of the protests ultimately, after I was worried that he would catch COVID, did exactly that. Ended up in grave, grave peril. His wife was in the intensive care unit. His name was Witkoff. He later disavowed the protests against the vaccinations after seeing individual after individual after individual be intubated and go into the ICU because he experienced it. And that's what we as physicians see too often. Once a tragedy occurs, and my heart is with everyone who had any kind of reaction to the vaccines that we're talking about or loses a loved one. Of course, we love our fellow mankind, but we cannot turn away from science. So these are some of the things I wanted to share with you today. Ultimately, we have to decide whether we're going to be committed to public health in our country. And right now, we are in great peril. It is absolutely my firm belief that vaccines have saved millions of lives over the last 50 years, 150 million by many people's accounts. It's decreased infant mortality by 40% globally. And we have to continue to commit ourselves in this way. So I'm concerned. I'm concerned that as we end up in a politicized discussion, that we will move away from science. We will not trust one another, experts. We will not trust one another, and we will end up in conflict. So what I would say is this. Let's work together. Let's find a way to actually find the common ground to protect our children. Let's find a way to make sure our public health system remains intact, not taken apart by the current approach where HHS is jettisoning many of its people, many of the billions of dollars, perhaps many of the vaccinations. This is our opportunity to come together, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this as the hearing goes on, but I'll say one last time. Vaccines save lives. I've given vaccines. I've taken vaccines. I've treated people that didn't get vaccines, and it's broken my heart when they've passed away.
Thank you, Governor Green. Quick comment. I'm not aware anybody on my side of this issue has politicized it. The accusation is always that we're not. You did state, by the way, 10,000 lives saved in Hawaii. I would love to have your citation on that. So if you can give us a study so we can put that in the record. And any other citation, give us on the millions of lives saved by vaccines as well. I mean, I want to know the truth. Just real quick, I've got a couple other charts I want to put up there. This is a chart, a lot of people produced it.
Chairman, if I could just interrupt for 10 seconds over here.
Sure.
Is today's just a point of order? Are we talking about vaccines or are we talking about the COVID vaccine?
Well, specifically, we were talking about the hiding of the safety signal on myocarditis.
So we're not talking about all vaccines?
We can talk about anything you want to.
Okay.
I mean, again, it has obviously opened up because we're also talking about the corruption of science. And I think science has been corrupted. So fair game. So, and again, I appreciate you staying here and stick around and ask a lot of questions. I think you'll learn an awful lot. Put my time back on the clock. No, I'll take whatever I want. This is a chart. This is a chart. Again, I was looking at the VAERS. You know, I had been.
Mr. Chairman, that's not the way I ran this subcommittee.
I had been, well, this is a different, again, I'll be very generous, okay? I was actually instructed as a non-doctor what the COVID injections were. Encapsulated in lipid nanoparticle that was designed to permeate difficult to permeate barriers. So they lied to us when they said they'd stay in the arm. They knew it wouldn't. They had a study, the Japanese regulators uncovered that when they did do a biodistribution study in rats, it distributed all over the body. So that was the first lie. Didn't really talk about too much about the toxicity yet of the lipid nanoparticle, but it goes all over the body. So I was aware, and again, that this was not a standard vaccine. This isn't a attenuated or dead virus that the body reacts to. This actually hijacks the cell, has the cell produce the spike protein, which is toxic to the body, which means the body attacks it. Again, I'm a layman, but it's pretty simple for me to understand this. So I was aware of this like in October. So I'm watching VAERS, and so I'm publishing these charts, and I'm being censored. I see the next chart, chart number 2. This is the full history of VAERS and the number of deaths being reported associated with the vaccine. You got a couple hundred a year until 2021, and yikes, 21,725 deaths worldwide. Why? And everybody's saying, no, this is safe and effective. The vaccine injured were being gaslit. They weren't being treated. They're still being gaslit. There is no, by the way, there is no compassion, Governor. I could fill this room with photos of people who are dead because of the COVID injection. I could fill the room. And that is being denied. That is being denied. It is being denied. And these people haven't been able to get help. I held an event in Milwaukee in June 2019 and 2021, and all the vaccine injured, those women, all they wanted was to be seen and heard and believed, and they are not to this day. Okay? So again, they're not the ones politicizing. They just want to be helped. They want compassionate doctors to treat them, to recognize what caused their illness, not gaslight them, not deny that it exists. But anyway, so you take a look at this chart, and they're still denying that this, nothing to see here. This is safe and this is effective. Okay? Next chart. This is the current VAERS chart. 38,607 deaths reported worldwide associated with the COVID injection. And we know VAERS dramatically understates, by a factor of 10, 100? We know it understates it. 9,228 of those deaths are occurring on the day of vaccination in the 1 or 2 days. Okay, I know VAERS doesn't prove causation, but man, that's a correlation we should have been looking at, but they ignored and they censored. But enough of that. Dr. McCullough, please, in my layman's terms, I just kind of laid out the harmful mechanisms of this injection. Can you and Dr. Vaughn, because I think you've both spoken to this, again, in layman's terms, talk about why this caused so much harm in so many different ways because of the biodistribution. Dr. McCullough.
80% of Americans took a vaccine. 20% didn't. 20% did not take a vaccine. The vaccine was never safe enough for me to take. Messenger RNA, devised by Pfizer and Moderna, has been chemically modified to be unassailable to enzymes in the body to be broken down. The messenger RNA is found in the human heart of people who die after the vaccine. It's found in the brain. The spike protein is found everywhere in the body. 3 studies now show the spike protein is circulating in the blood for 6 to 9 months after people take the shot. This part of the virus, the lethal part of the virus, in the vaccinated, it's circulating in the blood. And then they take a booster, they get more circulating in the blood. It is a killer protein. It cannot be safe. It was not safe by design. Safety trumps efficacy. We cannot tolerate false drug claims. And we saw a poster behind Senator Blumenthal making a false drug claim that vaccines saved millions of lives, specifically the COVID vaccine. Well, let's take a look at that. When someone signs consent for a vaccine, Senator Blumenthal, does the consent form say it's going to save their lives? Of course it doesn't. It's not on the FAQ. There's never been a prospective, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial ever showing that COVID-19 vaccines reduce mortality or hospitalization. There's not even a valid non-randomized study. Thankfully, COVID mortality went down for 3 reasons. Because we all got the infection, vaccinated and unvaccinated, so we developed population natural immunity. We developed early treatment. Credit to Operation Warp Speed. We used all the Operation Warp Speed tools, additional drugs. We treated patients with multi-drug protocols at home so they don't go to the ER. So Governor Green never saw the patients we treated because they were successfully treated at home. And the third reason is that the virus mutated to a much milder form. Those things happen concurrently with rollout of the vaccine. The vaccine cannot be falsely credited with saving millions of lives. We can't allow false drug advertising to be put up on a poster behind one of our public servants. We cannot accept that.
So let me quick. And I will have a lot more questions. Put up my that optional chart number 4 here, because I think this is something I developed September 2021, and this shows the number of daily cases of COVID, and you see it's peaking in January. Right as we're rolling out the vaccine, but we really haven't injected it with anybody. If by the time we had any kind of significant uptake of the vaccines, we were way down in terms of the number of daily cases. I mean, this virus was burning itself out. Okay, now we had different variants. Again, I've read a lot of information about vaccination into the midst of a pandemic driving variants. Is that what happened? I don't know. But you would think if a vaccine were that effective, the tail would just continue and the pandemic would be over. But that's not what happened. We had a whole new surge, and this is Delta, and doctors I've talked to, a very deadly, probably a more deadly. Would you agree with that, Dr. McCullough? Delta was a more deadly. I know you guys are kind of freaking out that your early treatment wasn't working as well.
It was definitely more difficult to treat. But fortunately, by that time, we had treatments.
But anyway, I just wanted to put this thing up here again. Again, to a layman, if the vaccine really worked, was that efficacious, to prevent all that disease? By the way, they all admitted that it didn't prevent transmission. They lied to us about that for 4 months, if maybe a year. Then they finally had to admit it didn't prevent transmission. But again, this chart right here just shows you that if the vaccine really would have worked, you wouldn't have had this. You wouldn't have had this. But I'll turn it over to Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I think we'll try to certainly stay within our 7 minutes so our colleagues can have their day of questioning.
But again, we'll have second, third, fourth rounds. I mean, we'll use up the time of this hearing room.
The debate here seems to be about the efficacy of COVID-19. But the central issue that brings us here today is the allegation that there was purposeful concealment of knowledge and evidence. And I just want to make the point, I may be sounding a little bit like a lawyer, not a physician, but purposeful concealment, intentional hiding is essentially undocumented by the evidence released by this report itself. In fact, the documents released by the majority today show that public health officials took multiple steps in the spring of 2021 to make healthcare providers aware of those rare reports of myocarditis among vaccine recipients. On May 14th, almost 2 weeks before the CDC decided to issue clinical considerations rather than a HON on myocarditis, which is, by the way, the primary piece of evidence that the majority cites in this so-called cover-up. The CDC's National Center of Immunization and Respiratory Disease sent an email to state and local health departments around the country entitled, quote, "Monitoring Reports of Myocarditis," end quote. The email noted risks and contained a reminder that providers were obligated to report cases. 5 days later, they sent out a follow-up email urging recipients to let providers in their region know of risks and reminding them once again of the obligation to report cases. I have 2 emails here that are in the majority report. They're available to the public. I ask that they be made a part of the record, Mr. Chairman.
Objection?
I'm not going to read them. They're for everyone to see. One begins with, "I would like to flag a message we sent out late Friday night. I encourage you to forward this important message about vaccine safety and reporting And it goes on. Warnings. Far from a cover-up, these public health officials were trying to alert scientists, doctors, the public about the potential side effects. Mr. Siri and I are both trial lawyers, and issuing that kind of warning is far from evidence of trying to hide or conceal something. You can say they were wrong somehow, but intentional cover-up is not within the realm of the plausible allegations here. So I think we need to be really clear and careful when we start discrediting scientists or public health officials. I'd like to ask Governor Green, can you tell us how, as a physician, publicly funded research, which is being cut by this administration, is important to establish not only new vaccines, but also the safety and efficacy of ongoing use of vaccines?
Thank you, Senator. So, as governors, we rely on funding to do so many things from the federal government, and cuts to research will be devastating. You can't just simply pause research and wait until a different ideology resumes governing, or until we get through these hearings and we restart critical research projects. We will lose ground on this science and the science that benefits from it, the R&D that goes forward. We've all been very supportive for decades of advanced scientific research. Sometimes it happens through the military, sometimes through our universities. We are in deep trouble if we stop the research component of our commitment to our people. We will also be in grave danger if we don't do the public health assessment in our states, in our rural areas, because we will not even know what we're being affected by. We will be blind to the diseases that roll through our communities, whether it's chronic disease or acute disease from an infection like this. And I just need to address a couple statements that I feel are misconceptions. And I'm not judging. I feel that there is a misconception that the COVID vaccination didn't decrease the severity of disease. That is what it did. It decreased the severity, and I saw this clinically, and we saw this from a public health standpoint. It decreased the severity of what people were facing, so they didn't die, or they died at a much lower rate. And you can see that in the charts that we've seen, but through looking at them through a different lens, the exact same charts. When the death rates dropped because people had begun to develop immunity, because their immune systems were responding to the vaccination. And in fairness, we could debate the language, but even some of the individuals that are also testifying with me here today referred repeatedly to the mRNA vaccination because it was putting these particles into people, and then the immune system was responding to them. And so I do feel that it's a vaccination, but be that as it may, we ultimately saw the ability to stop the severe and deadly cases in our hospitals. And so there are many ways to view vaccinations. There's many ways to view treatments, and they're all valuable. For some, vaccinations straight up stop infection from occurring. That's the case when we talk about measles. Measles, mumps, rubella, when you get that vaccine, you really prevent the spread to a great degree. And it was commented earlier that we were misleading, or we were being misled by others on what the vaccinations were doing and what the information was that was being shared. Well, let me tell you what it was like during that period. And we all saw it. There was a great deal of confusion because the unknown was so enormous. And to the credit of scientists and to the credit of those who invested in the research at, again, extreme speed and extreme dollars, we were able, as a nation and a global community, to find our way to something that helped us. Now, of course, there were some tragic outcomes, and again, not a single case should ever be dismissed, minimized. No one should be impugned. But the grander picture of a vaccination program is to protect all and to find a way to protect people so that they can also help protect the people around them, which is why the research is important, the spending is important, why I'm very concerned about the announcement yesterday that we will only be recommending vaccinations for people over 65 or those with chronic disease, because a couple points. One, first of all, and I'm sure many of you had this experience, the chairman mentioned going to Swarthmore College, which was my alma mater. The president of our class, named Nick Jesdanin, 51 years old, unvaccinated because the vaccinations were not yet available, healthy, a marathon runner, died of a COVID infection. He was a prominent writer, an extraordinary human being, but utterly healthy. And that may have been, of course, more rare than an 82-year-old or a 91-year-old contracting COVID and dying, but it does happen. He is an individual that would have been vaccinated immediately when given the opportunity. And also, the reasons that we were able to avoid so many unnecessary deaths in a very difficult to treat state, where we have 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 generations of people living under the same roof with one provider. The challenge there is if we suddenly can't vaccinate teenagers or people who are 28 years old and are the breadwinners for their community, and we have another pandemic, or we have this outbreak worsen again, they will come home with the disease and very likely spread it to those who are vulnerable. And so I'll pause there. I just say that we should give people choice and we should honor and respect their stories, but we have to do the research.
But their stories haven't been honored and respected. Our next question will be Senator Kim.
Yeah, thank you. Governor, I guess I just would like to stay with you here for a sec, because I think you have an interesting perspective, someone who's both a doctor as well as an elected public official in an executive position. And I'm trying to digest the information that I'm hearing here and thinking about how to talk about it to my constituents back in New Jersey. And if they're watching this, I think that a lot of this is beyond what the average person understands. It's beyond what I understand in terms of the fullness of what happens in terms of our health system. So from your experience, Governor, when these cases come forward, these cases that Dr. McCullough and others have raised, in terms of these concerns, what's supposed to kick in? How does this system work? You talked about this, saying that, we have a robust system for safety, that the system is designed to monitor, identify, and transparently report possible side effects, to review. Can you explain to me and my constituents, how this unfolds and what to expect?
Yes, thank you, Senator. So the way it should work is that we totally support science and we support public health so that we are able in labs and in public health offices to take in the concerns, the complaints, the vignettes, the data, and analyze it thoroughly. And to the chairman's concern, I'm sure some people were not listened to or they felt not listened to, and that should never happen. That is one of the great challenges of our modern time, where we're talking past one another, where when people are spreading their stories anonymously, sometimes they're spread in ways that are not really even from the individual who's suffering themselves. There are great challenges, but we have to have this robust system. And how do you talk to people? How did I talk to people? In my state, and many people feel that we had the most positive and effective strategy to deal with COVID, was because we did something very simple. It was partially accidental. In the early days of COVID, I started a whiteboard. And ultimately, tens then hundreds of thousands of people followed this whiteboard. And just so people know that it didn't have bias, implicit or otherwise, it didn't have partisanship, I just put the actual numbers that we had to the minute of how many cases that day, how many people were vaccinated, how many beds we had, how many intensive care unit beds were available, how many ventilators were available at each facility, how many infectious disease doctors, and so on. So that if someone truly didn't believe COVID was a threat, and some people felt that way, they could just look at the data and decide for themselves how they would respond in their lives. This is how you talk to your constituents about something that's this disconcerting, in fact, terrifying. And we just showed day after day after day, in a brief moment, sometimes 90 seconds, exactly what we had as the best data, long before we had these very complex reports from Johns Hopkins or USC or other universities, okay? Before we had that, we had our capacity in our state to share with our people what we were dealing with. And so what happened? Now, people could argue about this, but I will tell you that I believe we had far more people get vaccinated because I just shared exactly what we were experiencing. And I'll tell you, I look back at some of those early reports, and I sometimes shudder a little bit because we learned so much, which is what happens with science during one of these crises. You learn as you go. There were times, as you know, that we didn't have the right recommendations on masks. And we, of course, could debate that in this room, I'm sure. But we gave our best scientific data and our best experiential data. And that's how you talk to people. And yes, you never tell people that they are not valued, and you never just dismiss their stories. And I'm positive I or others have been guilty of that in the moment, and we shouldn't be. But we also should not demonize one another. And when we, in my family, ultimately had protesters, which did, to a large degree, cross some lines, when some people were just communicating with me, other people, I have to be honest with you, some people wrote swastikas on signs that were next to my home. Certainly, my father's Judaism had nothing to do with my COVID response. But I can tell you that sometimes because people were traumatized, and I understood how scared they were, and I understood what they were hearing out there, but that's how you talk to people. And if we do that after not, and I have to be honest about this, if we don't systematically dismantle our public health system, we'll be okay. We will find common ground, even though I suspect that there are some pretty significant differences between me and some of the other testifiers on what we would do with the next pandemic. We would actually be able to still move forward together.
Yeah, I mean, I think, something you said earlier I thought stuck out to me, the sense of that, no one should be ignored. I think that's a principle I hope everyone here can agree upon, that I think they always have space for more transparency. But also just keeping in mind that broader context. I mean, as you're saying, here are the challenges that we're facing when it comes to this system and how we can work on it. I mean, certainly, I can imagine your experience, whether on addressing COVID or in Samoa, certainly that becomes more difficult to fully enact this monitor, identify, and the transparency report. When you're in the middle of a crisis, when you're in the middle of the chaos, that's something I think we can try to do to improve. To the point that was raised earlier, I think a lot of this also says this is a reason why we need to invest in capacity, invest in personnel, people working in our government to do this, and as opposed to cutting back on staff and trying to say that we need simultaneously more transparency when that becomes all the more difficult. But I mean, look, I understand, and I've had people in my life that have been ignored and not believed, whether that's, my time as a diplomat before, and people I know struggling with Havana syndrome and people telling them, I don't believe you, and other issues that are out there. But we should always have that system in place. And that's what I just hope we can come back to. I mean, I get it. I'm new on this committee, and I understand that I'm seeing, years worth of back and forth that are coming here. But someone who's coming with some fresh eyes, I hope that we can try to cultivate that sense of trust that I know has been so deeply wounded, because I worry about what comes next. I worry about how we deal with the next diseases, the next pandemics, how we try to move forward and understand how this technology of mRNA and others try to move forward on. So I just appreciate, being able to hear this all and try to figure out how best I can be able to relate to the people in New Jersey, around this country, about the safety of the COVID vaccines that I have seen be able to save lives, but also be able to assure that we won't ignore people if they have other concerns, and we do our best to be as transparent as possible and to be careful of accusations of personal malfeasance, especially with some of our public servants, in terms of whether or not they were intentionally withholding information or not. We need to be very careful about those accusations on this committee. And with that, I'll yield back.
I will say we are just seen the tip of the iceberg here, and you will see more evidence. Trust me. Senator Marino.
Well, first of all, thank you, Chairman, for putting on this hearing. I'm going to focus on, let's just stick to COVID-19 and COVID-19 policies. Let's not get into this conversation about vaccines writ large. Dr. McCullough, do you feel that you were listened to in 2021? Did you feel ignored?
Our November 19th, 2020 hearing done for Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs was very lightly attended by our senators who are working for us. That's a disappointment. It's disappointment there's chairs empty here. Our hearing was actively suppressed, scrubbed off YouTube.
So just to clarify, not only were your viewpoints ignored, you were called a conspiracy theorist, a spreader of misinformation, somebody who didn't know what they were doing, by people who didn't even take a science class in high school. And yet you're a doctor and you're completely ignored. Let me ask you, Dr. Vaughn, real quick question. How many children under the age of 5 years old died of COVID?
So very, very few. Actually, theoretically, a healthy child under 5, there wasn't any.
So it's basically zero?
Yes, it's
How about under
statistically
the
zero.
age of 10?
It's still statistically zero.
15?
When you get up
15?
into the 15, 16, I mean there is some.
So under 15, none?
Yeah.
Pretty much, none?
Statistically, yes.
All right, so I'm confused because Governor Green said he held the children who would have died from COVID, but that's crazy because evidently nobody died of COVID who was under 15. We're talking about, but see, that's the confusion. See, when we talk about COVID vaccines and then we stick in other vaccines, we get off topic because COVID-19 wasn't about measles. Now, Dr. Thorp, do you think, good idea or bad idea, that you should close schools? Now,
Bad idea.
No, why? I mean, kids can learn at home, can't they?
They can learn very well at home, but at school, they will have the opportunity to develop natural immunity.
So, and school, well, by the way, schools is where you socialize, you learn your behaviors, you learn how to meet other people. Because if we don't believe in schools, the federal government and state government can save a lot of money. So schools are important. Let's just get that out of the way. So why would you close schools, which you did, Governor, when no children died of COVID? What would make you make that decision? You close schools. And by the way, the impact on that is generational. You destroyed the lives. You and the other governors that closed schools destroyed the lives of children in doing that.
So, okay, I've got to tell the audience, please notice, sir.
Senator, may I respond to these
that was
accusations?
a question for you.
Yeah, I think it was. Well, first of all, I think you misunderstand some of the value to.
No. Why did you close schools?
Well, I'm going to address each
Just
of your
answer
points.
that and not filibuster me, please.
I'm not going to filibuster you. Schools, I did not want to close, and
But
we
you
tried
did.
Actually, I was not governor at the time.
But you were lieutenant governor and you were the point person. Do you think the governor made a mistake in closing schools?
We reopened the schools as soon
Did
as
you
we
think
could get
he
the
made a
teachers as soon as-
mistake?
Well, if
Do you
I
think he
can,
made a
may I
mistake?
answer the question, or is the senator going to filibuster me, sir?
No, you're going to answer my direct question or just say I'm not going to answer you.
No, I'm going to answer
Do you
your
think
question.
it was a good idea? Yes or no, the two choices in this answer. Do you think it was a good idea to close schools? Simple answer. Just give me a yes or a no.
As we had COVID surging through our society because there was massive spread from children to adults, we were waiting to make sure the teachers
So let me get this straight. You sacrificed the lives of children because maybe they would spread something that you don't know to adults. You thought that was a good idea. That's interesting.
No, that's
Okay.
not always it. Actually, it's your
okay.
party that's
Okay.
trying to
We can-
close
we
our
can-
schools
we
and get
can-
rid of the Department of Education. So we do have
So we're not
differences of
politicizing
opinion.
this hearing. Okay,
No,
we're
well,
moving
you,
on.
You said my
We're
governors
go-
and
we're
the
go-
other governors that close schools, which is a politicization
Look,
of the issue.
when I'm in Hawaii and I'm having a hearing before you, you can interrupt me. When
I will.
you're here before the United States Senate, you're not going to interrupt me. Moving on. So here's the next question for you. Show me the science that said that when I walked into an airport in Hawaii, and I wasn't, I didn't want to tell you because it's none of your business whether I had a COVID vaccine or not, or tested positive or not, because that's also none of your business. Where's the science where I had to quarantine for 14 days. Tell me the science behind why you locked your residents up and did not allow them to go grocery shopping, why you closed your beaches and your parks. I would love you to put that science into this record, because you can give me the nice, happy talk, but those were terrible decisions. And what COVID highlighted more than anything else, by the way, it's why I'm here. I ran for the United States Senate, not because I had this deep desire to be a government politician, but because I was so incensed by the arrogance, by the ignorance, by the lack of common sense among our elected officials that we needed different kinds of people here in Washington, D.C. and other places. So,
Shall I answer those questions, Chairman?
no, there's no question for you. That was just a
There were
statement.
several questions.
No,
You asked about why a 14-day quarantine. You asked about
what's
what the
science?
airports.
Sure, what's the science, 14-day quarantine?
Because
Not 12, not 16.
Actually, I asked for 5 days, just so you know.
So
With
what
my-
was it? Was there a dartboard?
No, it was 5 days because that was the amount of time from symptoms to transmission.
So
that
why
we-
14?
The 14-day was before we had the
So 14 wasn't scientific, just to be clear.
14 days was how long it took for people to get over the disease, and people were still shedding virus through that period, and that's why you do use science and I use science, but you didn't like science for Hawaii. But we did have the test, and we did have the test to enter Hawaii, so people could make a choice, an informed choice, and they did. And then they didn't have to quarantine at all. Just to make sure you know that, because I think you got your facts wrong. And also, I didn't close the beaches. That was the mayor of Honolulu and not me. So just, it is important that you get the facts right if you're going to be a political official.
So that's what you're saying. It wasn't me. It was the other guy.
No, it was me who ran the COVID response.
Zero accountability. Dr. McCullough.
I'll take more accountability if you give me more time.
I'm done with you, Governor. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So Dr. McCullough, quick question for you. Just completely objectively. Look, I went to business school. I was not a doctor. So I'm going to truly objective, using your most subjectiveness here. Did the vaccine stop the spread of COVID-19?
No.
So then let me ask you one simple question. We'll go down the line. You guys can answer it. It'll be my last question. So if COVID-19 the vaccine, the injection, did not stop the spread of COVID, why is it that Joe Biden, President of the United States, issued an executive order, which was ruled unconstitutional, by the way, that said that if you worked for a company with 100 employees, because not 99, 100, that you would be fired if you did not prove you didn't have a COVID vaccine negative test or got vaccinated? Why would we have some decision like that? How depraved do you have to be to do that? Answer the question the way you feel down the line. Go ahead, we'll start with you, Mr. McCullough. Dr.
Briefly.
My testimony on this issue went all the way to the Supreme Court that overturned 4 out of the 5 Biden mandates. They were scientifically ungrounded, they were sociologically deranged, and they caused great harm. To this day, people are in court trying to get their jobs back and trying to put their lives together because of these disastrous policies.
And just to be clear, sorry, Chairman, nurses were included in that, correct? Healthcare workers. The ranking member called them heroes. It seems to me that when you have a hero, you don't terminate their ability to make money and have them fired because they're making a personal choice. Because he ultimately, and I'll end with this, ultimately, this is what this is all about. See, I get to get a choice if I'm going to get vaccinated. And if it doesn't stop the spread, it is none of any other human being in this country's business what I did or did not do. Would you agree quickly?
100%. And I think Director Walensky, when she said of the science of hope, that is not science. Science is facts. Hope is not science.
Thanks, Senator Marino. Again, please, let's not express any emotion out there in the audience. Dr. Walscog, I just have to go to you because you have direct experience. I almost feel like bringing up Breanne Dressen to talk about the concealment that you witnessed firsthand when it came to your working with, Bree's working with NIH officials, trying to do studies, being carried along with some assurance that this was going to be revealed to the public, and it never was. Just talk about that level of concealment. Again, there's going to be so much evidence of this if it hasn't been destroyed. this is just the tip of the iceberg, what we're seeing here with myocarditis. But talk to what you and your fellow vaccine injured who were dismissed, who were gaslit, who were treated horribly. I mean, horribly when you came to the United States Senate and asked to be heard by senators and their staff, you were treated. Describe how you've been treated.
Well, thank you, Senator Johnson. So what I'd like to say is being vaccine injured in this country is unfortunately a huge polarizing event, which it should never be. If I could describe one word that I think all, if not most, vaccine injured will say is, what's one word that describes your experience after your injury? And it's abandonment, okay? We get attacked, we walk a tightrope. We get attacked from the right say, we're stupid, we shouldn't have got a shot, we should die. Okay, and I could show you social media stuff. The left says we're anti-vaxxers, which to me is one of the most ignorant things to say of myself, because all my children have been vaccinated. I got vaccine injured because I got vaccinated. But still, regardless, we get called anti-vaxxers. We report these to VAERS, okay? Nothing happens. I had an adverse event, which was, delayed the AstraZeneca trial in the United Kingdom, 2 times for 3 cases of transverse myelitis. I expected a call the day after. Days passed, weeks passed. By 3 weeks, I called the CDC myself and demanded, a response. I always thought, I'd get this quick response and someone would help us. All of us that are vaccine injured know there's no phone call coming. There's no help coming. We have repeatedly met, and Brianne Dressen, who's my co-chair with Reactine, have met with Peter Marks over and over and over for the last, for a period of about 2 years. We have been placated. We have been blown off. We bring up adverse events, the neurological adverse events. We bring up the MIS, which is the multi-system inflammatory syndrome. We bring up the myocarditis. He thanks us. He says he'll get back to us. He never does. That went on for 2 years. So for people that think it's this kumbaya where people are listening to us and people are all in these federal agencies are trying to help and get to the bottom of it, it is the farthest from the truth.
So there have been a number of claims made, and I think there will continue to be a number of claims made. I just ask anybody making a claim, please provide your citations. Please provide, again, respect the science. Let me see the science. I mean, I'm very genuine here. Let me see, the science behind this actually reduced the symptoms, or this prevented deaths, or this prevented transmission. I would like to see the science. Dr. Vaughn, you are really specializing in the blood clots. I've seen video after video, picture after picture of these long white blood clots in autopsy. We've also, throughout COVID, autopsies were really discouraged. We weren't seeking the scientific truth. I see Dr. McCullough, I'll have you kind of answer that, but Dr. Vaughn, first talk about the clotting we saw and what you know in terms of what was discovered under autopsy.
Well, first of all, early in COVID, the spring of 2020, my collaborator, Jacques Lobster in South Africa, was the first one to kind of alert people to say that this was primarily a vascular disease, not a pulmonary disease. And that's one of the reasons that ventilators are probably one of the most ineffective things you could have done to people, because if you have a vascular disease of the lungs, increasing the intrathoracic pressure just closes down more vessels and ultimately kills them. And what we also saw was if you went into the hospital in the spring or summer of 2020, you were twice as likely to leave alive if you were already on a blood thinner. Now, I will tell you, most of your friends that are on blood thinners probably aren't healthier than you, so it's kind of interesting to find out that the people that were on blood thinners had a protection. So again, those were signals that were really downplayed. Unfortunately, after a lot of the treatment was codified by the CARES Act, it resulted in basically a protocol-based treatment for in-hospital care.
As long as you start, anybody describe remdesivir? Anybody want to speak to that? If not, I'll do that for another hearing. I mean, just the conflict of interest of how that was being approved, Yeah, so, okay, we'll wave off on that.
But what we uniquely found, and my collaborators in South Africa, Risha Pretorius and Doug Kell at University of Liverpool, was that the spike protein was able to induce fibrin from fibrinogen, which is a fancy word for saying, hey, forming the backbone of clotting. But it did it in a way that was different, that we had not seen. And it was what we would similarly think of fibrin as kind of like spaghetti coming out of the colander that you could pull apart when you didn't need it. It was easy to break down. But the actual clot that was formed in COVID or from the spike protein from the vaccine was like burnt spaghetti casserole that you have to get a Brillo pad to get off the dish. And a lot of people, their issue is their inability to break down that clotting mechanism. We all need to clot, but we all need to actually get rid of the clot, and that is the problem.
That's pretty obvious, was ignored. Dr. Thorp, I'll get to you, but Dr. McCullough, real quick.
Quickly, in the last 5 years, I've never treated as many blood clots in my entire multiple decades of in clinical practice as a cardiologist. The blood clots occur after the infection with the virus and the vaccine because the spike protein causes blood clots. It's without any controversy in medicine, the spike protein causes blood clots. So it is reckless and foolhardy to continue to vaccinate people and load the body with spike protein and cause more blood clots.
Well, there were other parts of the coronavirus that they could have used in the lipid nanoparticle. I mean, they could have injected something else that wasn't quite so toxic.
Yeah, and actually, a paper in Cell, July of 2021, it's called Broad and Durable Immunity from basically COVID. And what they found was the nucleoprotein was actually the thing that supplied broad and durable immunity for actually prevention of infection. Unfortunately, the spike protein did not elicit that response. And as much as we love this mRNA technology, it seems like they sold it as something that we could change on the dime as information actually came to light. And by July 2021, we knew the wrong protein had been picked. Why didn't they change it?
That's a good question. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Vaughn, I noticed that you were careful when you said that children didn't die of COVID to say statistically, which I appreciate. 1.2 million Americans died of COVID-19. Tragically, more than 1,000 of those deaths were children. In fact, 700 were 4 years old or younger. And I'm sure you will agree that those deaths were tragic, and most especially for the families who will never be the same. Children were affected by COVID. There's no question that children died, but equally important, the trauma of COVID affected children. The fear and anxiety that spread throughout their families. You don't have to be a doctor to understand that point, or a parent.
Yeah, I have a 7 to 9-year-old, and it was a very interesting time. But in many ways...
Well, interesting is a somewhat euphemistic way of putting it. I'm sure you'll agree. But let me just point out that our entire society was traumatized by COVID. People were out of school. We can argue about the merits of whether they should have been, but it has affected our entire society. And just so we're all on the same page here, I'm in strong agreement that schools are good. Kids should be in school. Let me point out, though, because we want to learn from history here, that when there are side effects, when there are threats to public health, there should be warnings. The public should know, so should doctors and researchers. And right now, I'm looking at a report from NPR. It's dated May 21 of this year, which describes the effects of cutting back on the CDC's capacity to warn, and says that many of the platforms, quote, many of the platforms the CDC used to communicate with the public have gone silent, end quote. It says, quote, Many of the CDC's newsletters have stopped being distributed. Workers at the CDC say health alerts about disease outbreaks previously sent to health professionals subscribed to the CDC's Health Alert Network, HON, haven't been dispatched since March. I understand the concerns that have been expressed here, and let's learn from scientific practice and make sure that the Department of Health and Human Services provides the resources that are necessary to warn the public. I want to ask Dr. Brown, because you've talked about both your experience in Samoa in 2019 with the measles outbreak there, which eventually killed 83 people, as I understand it. Again, measles was thought to be eliminated in the world. That outbreak was fueled by misinformation about the measles science, spread by a number of vaccine doubters or skeptics, including the now Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. That campaign caused the vaccination rate against measles in Samoa to drop from over 74% to just 34% between 2017 and 2018. Do you see parallels between the measles outbreak you helped to address in Samoa and the one that we're now seeing in Texas that has reached 31 states, including Hawaii, and the COVID-19 situation?
Thank you, Senator. There are more than parallels. It's just terrifyingly similar. So what happened, I'll give you the brief version, in Samoa was prior to the outbreak, 2 children had been given vaccinations, and tragically, there was human error, and 2 nurses who were later prosecuted made a mistake, a tragic mistake, and they used the wrong reagent, the fluid with the vaccine, and they vaccinated incorrectly these 2 children, and the 2 children perished, which is, of course, tragic in every way, and we always have to hold all healthcare people to account. Now, after that, there was panic, and what happened in the months and years thereafter was that human error was not a vaccine flaw, it was a human error, and that information was then spread incorrectly by then Mr. Kennedy, before being Secretary Kennedy, and the Children's Health Defense. And that country and their leadership told me this directly. They received letters. There were stories all across Samoa that this group of people came and convinced them not to vaccinate. And they had a lot of challenges with health literacy, and they stopped vaccinating. And then when you get vaccination rates that are that low, and mind you, we have this challenge because we have 14 states, my state is among them, where the kindergartners in our states, age 5, sometimes age 6, are at dangerously low vaccination rates for measles. When it gets that low, you're going to see outbreaks. Unlucky. The cases could come from anywhere. They could come from overseas. They could come from within our own country. But if you get below 95% and certainly below 90%, you see these outbreaks. And then you have, 1 in 5 people end up in the hospital. You have 1 in 20 with pneumonias. You have encephalopathies. You have all sorts of damage. So that's what happened in Samoa. And to be very direct, and actually I want to be generous here, there are many things that Secretary Kennedy is doing that I support. I support his work on some of the questions about processed foods and dyes and environmental toxins, things that I have believed for decades and fought for, as have many of you probably. However, this is so central to the public health of our country that because we have vaccine hesitancy, and because when you fall below 95%, and particularly below 90%, you will see these outbreaks. So we can anticipate that we're going to have a lot of outbreaks, first of measles, and there's going to be fatalities and lots of consequences. We're going to see pertussis. God help us all if we start seeing meningitis or polio break out. These are diseases that have been eradicated. And so what I would say is I really appreciate the chairman's focus on truth and making sure there's transparency and going through the record. I appreciate that. I appreciate individuals who I disagree with fighting for their voices. But what I don't appreciate is when there are individuals with no public health training, whether it's a senator or someone that's one of our colleagues, and they make a assertion to move away from science and away from prevention that has been proven, that I have deep concerns about. And that's what happened in Samoa, killing 83 people. We had to jump in, and then that is what is happening in Texas and a bunch of other states. And I don't think it would be very interesting to ask all the senators privately and congresspeople and all of us if any of us could accept that kind of spread of infectious disease amongst the people that we love. Even if we don't believe in vaccinations, we certainly don't believe in tragic outcomes, things that we can prevent. And that's where I think we should go as a country to heal.
Okay,
I'm
Senator
going to
Bloom.
interrupt
I was gonna say,
just
do you
to
have
say, I apologize. I am the ranking member on the Veterans Affairs Committee. There's a separate hearing beginning right now. I have more questions. I'm going to try to come back, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize. I'm going to have to leave. Thank you.
Appreciate you coming. This is the part I was actually looking forward to. Unplugged. So, Governor, I'm just going to be honest with what gets under my skin is how many times those of us who've had a different narrative on this, or not a narrative, but just a different viewpoint on this, we are always accused of ignoring science. I think I've been trying to follow it quite closely. So again, I will ask you, and we can go through your testimony. Every time you cited something, we will ask you to cite the study that proves what you're saying. Okay? So again, not really a challenge, it's a request. I mean, I would ask that of all of you. Any of you who have cited some study or some opinion, back it up. And we'll include in the hearing record. We'll have this hearing record will stay open for 15 days, so I'm really encouraging people, send me that science. Again, I entered a piece from Raphael Lataster that pretty well debunks the Watson, I think it's Watson et al., the claims it's the COVID injection saved millions. This is based on mathematical models. It really wasn't scientific study. So again, throw it all in the hopper and let the public decide. But I do have some questions. Dr. Thorp, speaking of corrupted studies, you mentioned in your opening statement the Shimabukuro study, which, by the way, Tom Shimabukuro, we have sent something like 70 oversight letters, more than that. In many of them, we've told the CDC, FDA, NIH, we demanded they preserve their records. And that should have been widely distributed throughout the agencies. You know, we, in our subpoena, specifically asked for the communications of Tom Shimabukuro. They couldn't find any. I know the current HHS is investigating that individual. We've sent I would call it a referral to the FBI and to Attorney General to determine this. But again, what happened there? Okay, again, when people are supposed to maintain records and they don't, I get suspicious. But again, going to Dr. Thorp, and I'm going to probably interrupt you because I want everybody to understand what you're talking about in this study, because we're talking about numbers here, but describe that study on, would you call it fetal demise, miscarriage, and how it was originally presented as evidence to push this on the most vulnerable, as you're saying, pregnant women and the unborn. And how did they distort that study to make that point? Go ahead.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. So the study in question is in New England Journal of Medicine on April 21st, 2021. And in that same day, the digital edition, there were two publications that were extraordinarily concerning. Both of them, interestingly, coming at a time when vaccine hesitancy was increasing. So the Shimabukuro study was a separate study in addition to an op-ed. The op-ed was by the New England Journal of Medicine, editor-in-chief, who was Eric Rubin, and the managing editor, who was Stephen Morrissey, and then director of the CDC, Rochelle Walensky. And they made statements that were false. They made statements that was fear-mongering, insinuating that pregnant women, if they didn't take the vaccine, would put their lives in harm, their preborn lives in harm, and their newborn lives in harm, when they knew absolutely the opposite was true.
How did they know that?
Well, they know that for several reasons, Senator. Number one, the study by Pinnells and colleagues, who is a maternal fetal medicine specialist from University of Texas, Houston, published a very large study documenting that pregnancy in of itself reduced the maternal mortality by as much as 75% during pregnancy compared to non-pregnant women. That study was available. Also, Dr. Shimabukuro, Tom Shimabukuro, and then director of the CDC, this was 7 weeks after the Pfizer 5.3.6 post-marketing data in 10 weeks that showed the COVID-19 vaccine was the deadliest and most injurious vaccine ever released, with 42,086 injuries, including 1,223 dead. They had that information. They still pushed it on pregnant women.
So let's get to the number where there's 700 individuals included in the statistic that shouldn't have been included. So describe that. I mean, talk about this study.
Right. Well, there's bias. There's bias in the title, okay? Just look at the title. There's bias in the 21 authors, all of whom were federal employees, and Tom Shimabukuro, a safety officer in the FDA itself. Then you go to the numbers. We're looking at about numbers of over 4,000 in a 10-week period. And then all of a sudden, it's just, how do we arbitrarily go to 10 weeks in this V-safe smartphone collection system? And then what happened to all the other patients? We go down to 827 patients. What happened to the rest?
So you got 827 patients that became pregnant or were pregnant in this, in terms of, again, it's not really studied, but I mean, they're just analyzing data. So you had 827.
Right.
Okay, so these were women who were pregnant.
Right. 827 that completed a pregnancy in 10 weeks.
Which is not necessarily a born child, but the pregnancy
Or
is...
a miscarriage, right.
Okay.
Now, they claimed a 12.6% miscarriage rate.
Which is pretty kind of a normal miscarriage?
No, it's not. No.
What's a normal miscarriage rate?
3% when you have a normal booking visit.
Okay,
and
it's already an abnormal miscarriage rate in that 827.
That's correct.
Okay.
And
so now describe exactly how they...
Okay, so we have 827 patients, right? And they talk about a 12.6% miscarriage. But a miscarriage of those 827, 700 of those mothers had their vaccine in the 3rd trimester. That's way beyond the window when a woman has a miscarriage. So they artificially took those 700 patients and put them in the 1st trimester. No, the 104 patients that had the miscarriage, that goes to the 127. 104 over 127, you're looking at 82% miscarriage. So the key is the percentage of women that got the vaccine in the 1st trimester had an 82% miscarriage. And by the way, that's the exact same miscarriage rate that was seen in the Pfizer 5.3.6 post-marketing
So
data.
I would argue that proves both points in the title of this hearing. the corruption of science, the corruption of federal health agencies. You know, Governor, listen, I'm cognizant of the fact that you're kind of outnumbered here. So I want to give you an opportunity to respond to that if you want to. You don't have to.
Sure. No, I'm happy to. Look, appreciate the information. The tragedy of a miscarriage is always there. It's not 3%.
What is it? What do you think it is?
Well, in my training as a family physician, the miscarriage rate for women is often in the 20s or 30 percentile. For women across their pregnancies, you know, there are just a lot of miscarriages that occur amongst women. So those are all tragic, and I would obviously defer to ACOG, the American College of OBGYNs, who did, and they should come and testify too, who did strongly recommend the vaccine. I mean, I'm not going to speak as an OBGYN. I'm speaking as an ER physician and as a governor. But I'm sure that would be a vibrant discussion. And again, it's a very good point that we have transparency in studies.
So let me move on to my next point. In one of our events, some of you were there, there's Dr. Moon opened up the insert for the COVID injection. Big piece of paper, you know, fold up and it's other than it says intentionally left blank, it's blank. Now this was quite a few years, I think this was probably a couple of years into the COVID injection, distribution of it, and all these studies, everything on VAERS, I would think somewhere, you know, when you take a look at the actual studies and the adverse events that were documented within those studies, it's now been released through the Pfizer papers and other means, you would think somewhere they ought to put some information in there. So the point I want to make is I think an awful lot of folks are saying that there was not informed consent. I would argue they violated the inviolable principle of informed consent with this COVID injection. I just think that's indisputable. I'll start with you, Dr. McCullough. Do you want to weigh in on that?
I've presented at the FDA advisory meetings. I've advised companies for decades on this, so I know the regulatory science very well. When a product definitely results in death, and there are thousands of peer-reviewed papers on this, Governor, the COVID vaccines in some people, sadly, result in death. Some on the very first day they take the shot. That must be a black box warning on the product immediately. I just checked the package inserts for the currently available products, the ones that Senator Blumenthal wants to pursue. Sounds like Governor wants to still pursue these. Our FDA still wants them to be administered. They still don't have the word death in the package insert. As of today, they don't. And so Americans are not fairly informed.
Do you have any doubt in your mind that the COVID injection caused some deaths? I mean, what do you think of the, 38,607 right now listed on VAERS? What do you think the real number is? And do you have any science to back up your opinion?
The best data are autopsies. So in the largest autopsy series published to date, I know because I'm the senior author, of all the deaths we examined, and we re-reviewed them. We had an adjudication committee. We had ways of arbitration, deciding on did the vaccine cause death. The answer is, of these cases that came in for autopsy after vaccination, 73.9% of individuals, it was determined that the vaccine was the cause of death. First author is Holscher and colleagues. He's sitting right behind me.
And again, by FDA's own laws, that should be included on that package insert, correct?
Immediately in 2021, Dr. Carol Tossetta, working with the Daily Cloud, wrote Peter's Marks in the summer of 2023 and said, where's the black box warning? Where is it? No word from Marks.
Dr. Vaughn, you want to weigh in on the informed consent?
Well, the other thing is, I think emergency use authorization, actually by definition, when you fill out the documents for the patient, if they read it, it actually says that they should make sure that they are under no compulsion to get this product. And that is what's so confusing, because even though the product was mandated in the summer, at the end of the summer of 2021, the product on the shelves was still the EUA product. And in that sense, for somebody to be mandated to something that they also have to sign to say that they weren't mandated to do it is kind of hard to do legally.
By the way, that's the subject of a couple oversight letters in terms of the whole full authorization type thing. Dr. Thorp, quickly?
Yes, on informed consent, there was completely the opposite in pregnant women. HHS appears to have captured the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and my research team, including Maggie Thorp, JD, have proven that with the Freedom of Information Act.
For a few million dollars, correct?
Many $1 million. They captured ACOG. In December of 2020, everybody at ACOG and the other organizations, we're not going to push this vaccine in pregnant women. In the span of a pregnancy, 40 weeks, September 27th, 2021, you will push the vaccine, you will push it in pregnant women and follow all the HHS criteria. And if you don't, we will destroy you and your professional career will take your license away and we will decertify you. That went out to 60,000 OBGYN doctors. So
we probably should have expanded the title of this: corruption of science, federal health agencies, what would you call those? Professional organizations?
These are the three organizations that essentially govern obstetrical care, not just in the United States of America, but the whole world.
By the way, I wanted to ask you, to what extent are the medical journals funded by various conflicting organizations, pharmaceutical companies? I've heard Chinese interests. I mean, are you aware of that? You were talking about the article written by the editors of the New England Journal of Medicine.
Yes, I'm aware of the study by Wen and colleagues, David Daniel Wen, that was just published October 10th of 2024, documenting that 1.06 billion with a B dollars went to the reviewers of the medical journals, of probably the most influential medical journals: New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet, BMJ.
And that's coming out of the pharmaceutical industry.
That's correct.
So Dr. Walscog, as a vaccine injured, do you believe you received informed consent?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, informed consent, and I, as a physician, I believe strongly in informed consent. Informed consent requires true and transparent data. And we can sit here and hear the mantra or the typical narrative of safe, effective, saved millions of lives, but in reality, that's not true. Okay? We can talk about efficacy if we want. Again, certainly the vaccines don't prevent infection, don't prevent transmission. I think I could present to you, I mean, and refer to a lot about safety data, particularly with regards to all the adverse events that I think there's more than ample evidence that the federal regulatory agencies ignored. A lot of these systems, FAERS, vSafe, I call deliberately deficient by design. So do I think I got informed consent? No. Do I think anyone here in the United States in the last 4 years have gotten informed consent in considering getting a COVID vaccination? Emphatically, no.
So by the way, my theory, and this is a theory, I don't have the proof, it's hard to prove these things, but my guess is the reason they were so concerned about issuing a warning on the HAN is, again, they didn't want any vaccine hesitancy on this, right? And also, if they alerted doctors to the fact that if you have a patient with myocarditis, you might want to ask them, did you just get a vaccine recently? And otherwise, the doctor's looking at myocarditis, trying to figure out how to treat it, right? Not trying to figure out the cause, because myocarditis does happen. Dr. McCullough, quickly.
Myocarditis was so common that in the UK and Australia, they actually did issue guidelines to doctors on how to recognize it and when to get MRIs. That's how big a problem vaccine myocarditis is.
Also, one of the points I made is they did not warn, or didn't advise doctors to advise against strenuous physical activity, right? They pulled that off of the one warning that they gave. I mean, talk about how dangerous that is.
That
and
is
also, I mean, the mild. Talk about how often myocarditis is mild versus serious.
Before the pandemic, there was myocarditis. Can be caused by Coxsackie virus. The most dangerous type is called giant cell myocarditis. It was very rare. I had seen 2 cases in my career. One was fatal. But it's in our guidelines. Anyone who develops myocarditis cannot undergo strenuous physical activity. They have to be taken out of sports. It's mandatory because the surge of adrenaline when there's inflammation in the heart triggers a cardiac arrest. So you can imagine how reckless it was for the sports teams to mandate vaccines on athletes, provide no provision of safety, and then have them go out on the field.
So why would these federal health officials, when they're discussing putting that warning, that advisory for physicians as they did their kind of weak need warning on myocarditis, what does that tell you? Why would they pull that out?
It was reckless not to provide prudent guidance on reducing the risk of cardiac arrest when a patient has vaccine myocarditis. Whether it's acute myocarditis that we clinically recognize, by the way, 90% are young men, 90% are hospitalized. Tracy Hogan, others at UCSD show that, multiple studies, but there's a larger group of subclinical myocarditis. These are patients with heart palpitations, blood pressure swings, atypical chest pain. Listen, this is water under the bridge. Fortunately, very few people are taking COVID shots anymore, but these patients still have symptoms. A recent report by Koyosmu in Journal of the American College of Cardiology has shown cardiac arrest in people years after the vaccines, and they have found vaccine microscars in the heart.
And we can keep going down this. I did want to go to Mr. Siri, who does a really good job of describing vSafe, because you actually had to sue. You should have had to sue, by the way, right? First of all, the health agencies who set up this vSafe, voluntary online report on specifically the COVID-19 injection safety surveillance, right?
Yeah, vSafe.
10 million people signed up voluntarily. You would think the federal health agencies would make that information just available anyway, but at a minimum, when you FOIA'd it, Freedom of Information Act, you think they would have just handed it over to you, right? They didn't do that, did they? You had to sue them. How long did it take you to actually get that vSafe data? And then why don't you describe what you've got and why they were probably trying to hide it?
Sure, it took over 2 years, and you'd also think with a name like vSafe, it would have been designed to actually assess safety with regards to the COVID-19 vaccine. So vSafe is a program that the CDC rolled out in December of 2020, along with the first rollout of the first COVID-19 vaccines. And as you just pointed out, Senator, the point was to ask people to sign up. 10 million Americans signed up, almost all of them in the first 6 months. This was when there were no mandates. These were folks who were enthusiastic about getting the vaccine. These were the folks who felt it was their civic duty. In fact, that's part of what they checked of why they signed up for vSafe. And so over the next 2 years, the CDC kept putting out study after study after study, dozens of them, in which it said the COVID vaccine is safe. When you look at those studies, what is it relying upon? One of the primary data sets it's relying upon is the vSafe data, okay? And so on behalf of our client ICANN, we, as you pointed out, submitted a Freedom of Information Act to the CDC, and we said, hey, this data you're collecting in vSafe is almost all de-identified, because most of it's checked the box. Please provide it. The American public pays for it. You're public servants. American public should have access to it, should be able to do what scientific inquiry is supposed to do, which is replication.
By the way,
yes.
Quickly, what did they ask and what didn't they ask on the vSafe?
Yeah,
I mean, talk how grossly inadequate it was.
Yeah. So, I mean, I understand this hearing's about, did our public health agencies do things that were improper? Did they have scienter? Did they purposefully do things improper? And when you look at how vSafe was designed, I think you'll see that. So vSafe had check-the-box most of what vSafe collected was via check-the-box options. Then it had some free text field. There were 2 categories of check-the-box options. The first category were symptoms. So you could check the box for various symptoms, right? And the
Like, maybe give us an example.
Fever, local, little pain.
The standard minor things, right?
Right. And so those symptoms, the V-Safe system only asked you for the first 7 days after injection. And as Dr. Shimabukuro even said in an email that we obtained via FOIA, those are the expected reactions. It's what they call almost immunogenicity. It shows the vaccine is working. And so the symptoms that they picked were totally useless for assessing the safety of the COVID-19 vaccines. And in fact, when you look at the studies that the CDC published, people were reporting those symptoms at 40, 50, 60% of them. Yeah, they reported, pain in the arm, of course. But they were viewed as normal to have a little chill, have a little fevers. And so that part of V-Safe was totally useless for assessing safety. So that wasn't useful. What was left? The only other thing that was checked the box was if you sought medical care, if you missed school or work, or if you were unable to perform normal daily activities, and if you checked that you you needed medical care, it then asked you, were you hospitalized, emergency room, urgent care, or telehealth, okay? So that was the data they were collecting. So presumably, V-Safe was gonna assess safety by looking at people who sought medical care after vaccination, because everything else they collected on check the box was, at least on the symptoms, was not useful. Now, before I go on to tell you what the healthcare seeking data showed, I just want to go back to the symptoms that the CDC chose. One of the things that we obtained was a copy of the very first version of the design documents for creating V-Safe. And when you go to the last page of that design document, it's in my 66-page submission. Everything I'm saying is in the 66-page position with citations and support. What you will see is they had a table. It was called Adverse Events of Special Interest, Pre-Specified Medical Conditions. And on that list, it had myocarditis, it had pericarditis, it had all of the issues that we now see and people have reported with regards to COVID-19 vaccine. It was in their design document before they launched V-Safe, but not a single one of those conditions ended up as a check the box, or at least the symptoms of those conditions. You could have put in at least chest pain if you didn't want to use the word myocarditis or pericarditis, but they didn't do that. To me, that is the best evidence, one of the best pieces of evidence out there that our federal health authorities knowingly, consciously chose to design this system. It was not to determine safety. It was in order to assure their a priori assumption of safety. At the end of the day, CDC is a government agency. In my experience, they don't conduct themselves based on what folks would call science or medicine. They are a policy organization. They set their policy, and then everything that they do has to conform with that policy, and their policy is safe and effective.
So again, voluntary system, 10 million people signed up.
Yes.
They've tracked all this data, inadequate, check the box information.
Not only inadequate,
and what they should have been just making available online, like quite honestly, like VAERS. I mean, VAERS available. You can see it, okay?
They should have.
They should have made that available as well. They didn't. And so you had to sue. When did you sue them?
Sued them. It would have been a few months after the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine. And
Okay,
it took us a
so
year
early,
and a half.
early in 2021.
It took us 2 lawsuits, actually, because we, in order to make them take contradictory positions, and only, so we sued them 2 different ways, and only when they had no choice, they finally released the data after
And
a year and a half.
you first filed a FOIA request.
Yes.
And they should have just boom, they should have handed it over to you.
If
Right?
they want
Because
to be
they obviously
transparent.
were collecting this data, had to be kind of centralized. Wouldn't have been that big a task, I wouldn't think, to, okay, here's what the data shows.
It would have
us. They
taken them
should have-
seconds.
They should have, by law, should have just turned it over to you.
They should have.
And they didn't. So you had to go to court, and it took you 2 years.
It took it.
Okay, then so now drum roll.
Yes.
What did the V-Save data show once you finally extracted it by a lawsuit using the courts?
Yes.
What did they show you about how safe the
Here's what
injection was?
Here's what it showed. In contrast to the dozens of studies that the CDC relied upon to say that COVID-19 vaccines were safe using V-Safe data, where they only reported the first week of what people reported after the injection seek medical care, even though they know that injuries from COVID vaccine can happen well after the first week, but they only reported the first week to make the number look low. And even though they designed the system to collect medical seeking behavior for 6 weeks after getting the vaccine and 3 more instances after that, when we got the data, it showed that 7.7% of V-Safe users reported needing medical care after the COVID-19 vaccine. And 75% of those reported they were hospitalized, emergency room, or urgent care. And on average, they sought medical care 2 to 3 times each. All of this data is publicly available now. And so if you're asking...
And by the way, and a quarter missed a day of work, which, by the way, Thomas McCullough, in a video before the emergency use authorization about the safety surveillance system, said, we're going to take this so seriously. If somebody loses a day of work, we're going to have a CDC official on the phone following up, checking it out. Was that your experience, Dr. Walscog?
Absolutely not.
Not exactly. Did you want to say anything else about that? I know I've been kind of stomping on you.
No, not at all. No, it's just this. When they designed V-Safe, the only data that probably could have assessed safety was medical seeking behavior. So you would hope our federal health agencies had a number. Look at how, how often COVID itself injured people. So you want to make sure the vaccine's safer than that, right? So was it 1 in 200 sought medical care? They pulled the plug? 1 in 100 people reported seeking medical care V-Safe, then they'd pull the plug? The data showed 1 in 13 people sought medical care on average 2 to 3 times each. I don't think there was a number, unfortunately, that would have been sufficient for CDC to pull the plug.
So what we sought for years is their analysis of errors. The proportional reporting ratio, which they did release some of those through FOIA to news organizations, that type of thing, not particularly useful. And by the way, they didn't particularly like that statistic anyway, so they did empirical Bayesian analysis. Never got it. Over a year, never got it.
Well, we have
Why?
2 federal lawsuits still going on right now for
Why?
the EV data.
Okay, now we're starting to get some of it. Okay, and again, I don't want to steal thunder or jump the shark on things that I know about that are being studied, but I think it'll be shocking to people to realize that they definitely had signals in empirical Bayesian that they were not reporting. And it will show, it's kind of complex, but this will be shown.
Well,
Okay, so that's what I say, they say, well, you're not proving the case on this myocarditis. No, this is the tip of the iceberg, of the cover-up, of the downplaying, and you have to ask why. Governor, just this story, were you aware of the story of V-Safe?
Through the testimony, I should probably be allowed to comment. There's been a lot of comments, and we talk about commenting and so on, because I'm pretty outnumbered here. Look, the couple things. First of all, VAERS, all right, which has been mentioned a bunch of times. It's not an adjudicated reporting system. It's valuable to get input, which we're grateful for, but it is a flood of experience, and there is no, there's no clear causal connection. No, I see your numbers, but that doesn't...
Did that cause you concern?
No, it didn't. I'll tell you why. Because we do want input, massive input. I'm grateful that there were people putting that in there. But that's why we do science and studies. We don't just do what this is.
I'm going to argue with you here, okay?
Fine.
Here's the problem, because I was going to go down this road. They didn't see safety signals because they didn't want to see them. They had them. They wouldn't report on them. They lied to us. So that's what I'm trying to get at. They lied to us, just like they lied and said, this thing's going to stay in your arm, when they knew it wouldn't, and we know conclusively it does not. They talked about the mRNA. This can just, it's going to go in there, stay in the arm, it's going to dissolve, in hours, couple days, whatever. But they knew it wasn't mRNA, it was modified RNA, and it stayed in the body, together with the spike protein. And we have studies of that. They're not talking about that as they continue to push this. So again, they've lied to us. So again, you can keep saying that, follow the science. No, the science has been corrupted and the agencies have been corrupted. So we have not been able to believe in them. That's why they have no credibility.
I'm entitled
Go
to
ahead,
answer
Governor.
many of these things. So we certainly disagree on a lot of things, okay?
Yes.
One of them is that you say corrupted and corruption, and that is possible, okay? But I didn't have that. I'm just sharing with you as a doctor and a governor and a public health officer and who had a great response for our state. We didn't have that experience. We did have a great...
By the way, I have checked other island nations and stuff.
Go ahead, check them.
Be interesting.
We were advising them. They were calling me for advice, and that's why we did safe travels, like the senator bristled at. We did actually find ways to help people know whether or not they had COVID, whether or not they'd spread it, whether or not people were at risk. We did that work, okay? Other people may have been, not doing that work. I don't know if anybody in this room did that work. I did the work, okay? I was out there saving lives either in the ER or as a lieutenant governor. Everyone else is talking about corruption, okay? I was doing the work.
We had doctors that had the courage to treat COVID patients as well. So.
Yeah, and I was a COVID patient also and in isolation for 14 days. And it was the right thing to do at the time, September 11th of the first year, because we didn't know if I would spread it to my children or to my wife or to other people that I cared deeply about or my constituents. So I honored it, unlike others might not have, okay, being in quarantine. So that's a different topic. Now, we've talked about myocarditis a lot, okay? And we are going to differ in our opinions about the data, I'm sure. However, there were about 12 cases from one perspective per million second shots. That's one of the studies and reports. I'm sure other gentlemen at this table are going to dispute that and have disputed that completely. But I will tell you that we saw one heck of a lot more terrible cardiac issues, myocarditis, far more clots for people that ended up in the ICU that we had to treat. We saw cataclysmic numbers when people got bad COVID and ended up at the hospital, but they didn't get bad COVID when they got vaccinated. That is the point. Now, we're walking past,
So again,
we're walking past a lot of those issues.
Okay, can you cite the study that proves that?
Yes, and I'm happy.
So provide them.
Of course, of course we will. And you can get, there's another 24,000 pages of data on both sides of this argument, okay? And everybody knows that the colossal damage to human beings.
Will you provide this committee that study?
Of course we will. And all of the data, nationally and internationally, showed that people had these complications in much larger numbers from severe COVID than they did from vaccinations, much larger numbers. Now, we can have that debate, and we'll get you at plenty of studies, okay? And the studies will be, he's shaking his head, but that's what the vast body of mainstream researchers and mainstream healthcare providers feel. Now, I don't want to disparage my colleagues that are up at this table, okay? But I will tell you that we are going down a rabbit hole to demonize the vaccinations. And maybe someday we will find that there should have been more transparency. Maybe people will find ultimately, that vaccines cause more harm than people were able to report at the time. However, it's my firm belief as a provider of healthcare and a person who had to make a state plan that there is value in providing vaccinations like this. And next time we have a pandemic, it's going to be even more serious if it ever affects children. I will tell you, people are going to clamor for vaccinations if children are terribly affected. And the country, you think it was shut down before, it's going to be shut down 50 times worse. We worked to open the state. That was a misrepresentation by the good senator from Ohio. We worked to open the schools and open the state by just making sure people had a test so that they were negative. It helped us. And we didn't force people to get vaccinated if they wanted to travel. And I didn't support mandates, just so you know the truth.
That's fine.
Right. So a lot of this, of course, is tilted very heavily to demonize this vaccination and the process. And I respect if the data comes out and shows that or someone covered up, I respect that.
So I will say the COVID cartel was tilted very strongly to demonize these people, okay? To vilify them, to offer retribution. So no,
but you just called them a cartel. You don't think that's demonizing somebody?
So there's no doubt this panel is definitely tilted toward one side, but the vast majority of the media and the agencies and everything else are tilted toward the one side, and that's what's so frustrating. The reason we'll have a tough time the next pandemic is because our federal health officials and the media lied to us, and we have proof they lied to us, and we have proof that they went and they used the power of the federal government to have social media companies censor people. Dr. Walscog, I do want to cover this because this is egregious, and people committed suicide because of this. But talk about how Facebook, after our event in Milwaukee, talk about how Facebook repeatedly shut down the support groups for the vaccine injured. That was their only lifeline because they could not get help. They weren't believed. They only had each other. And so they had these Facebook groups, and Facebook shut them down, and people lost contact, and people committed suicide because of it.
Yeah, so this is now earlier in 2021 when there was just a couple of isolated people across the country early on. For example, Breanne Dressen, who's my co-chair at React 19, she was injured during the AstraZeneca trial, so very much in the fall of 2020. And early on after that episode, she started communicating with some other people across the country. And, you know, her husband has some connections out at the NIH. That group started communicating with Dr. Nath, who is a neurologist at the NIH, who clearly confirmed that these injuries were vaccine related. These people started, you know, giving each other support, really. What do we do? What do we do? Communicated with Dr. Johnson's office. I'm sorry, Senator Johnson's office. And in the end, they had a press conference in June of 2021 in Milwaukee. And the idea of the press conference, again, don't let me speak for you, Senator, but was just to allow these people to be acknowledged and to communicate their story. Well, not only did the media show up and not cover their story, it turned into a hit piece basically on Senator Johnson. But more importantly, within 3 to 5 days after that press conference, all of those support groups that Brianne Dressen had set up were all shut down. And in retrospect, they found out that, you know, through the White House Communication Office, who was communicating with another contractor who was following her, and they directly through the White House Communication Office shut all those groups down. And you might say, well, it's too bad they can't communicate with each other. No, some of the people were suicidal and subsequently killed themselves. So this resulted in,
and Governor,
this is
again, I've heard you say, you know, and we should never do that, and it's regrettable and all kinds of stuff, but that's what happened. It happened repeatedly. It's still happening.
Look, let me support Dr. Walscog, okay, for a moment. Okay, first, I will be empathetic. It is terrible. And believe me, this is not anything that I would do. But let me just say this.
Sorry, Peter Marks didn't find it terrible because he's behind it.
Okay. Well, but I do want to say that is terrible, and we should have open communication. However, that is not necessarily what I'm feeling. The love here in the hearing, okay? And mind you, I spent 14 years on your side of the desk, and I spent now 6 years on the other side as an executive. The truth is, it's always somewhere in the middle. People have their biases, and if it's true that the Biden administration, encouraged people to not share information, that's bad. But there was another president also that was encouraging the vaccinations, and so we had two presidents, one Republican, one Democrat, in fairness, who they promoted the vaccine. And so all this conversation about not sharing enough of the potential risks and so on, everyone, and I would say this, everyone, including you guys and us and these good people, we're all responsible as a society to do our best to communicate. And when I hear words, just forgive me, when I hear words, you use the word cartel, and I'm not going to defend anyone. I'm saying that word is explosive, okay? And
it was developed out of firsthand experience dealing with them.
Believe me, and I have plenty of words to share about the people that threaten my life many, many times because I was a public health official, not even in favor of the things they were threatening my life over. Many times. Had to send it to our attorney generals. I'll get you copies of that too, Senator, if you'd like, okay? Pretty awful stuff when they threatened my daughter's life. We have also an 18-year-old daughter, sir. And so that is the problem here. Now, I am appreciative of the process you're going through because we should look at the horrible episode, which is what COVID was, and do better in the future. But if it ends up being skewed to the demise or the suppression ultimately of vaccinations, which is what a large part of society is fighting to do, then we will all lose. So again, that's why I'm speaking up.
What we're trying to do is restore integrity to science, which it has been corrupted. Again, you pay for science, you get the result you want. You got Fauci paying for science for 40 years, he's getting the result he wants. So again, I'm begging you, please provide the studies, the citations that prove that the injection actually reduce severity of symptoms, prevented deaths. Give us those studies so we can throw those in the hearing record and compare them to other studies like, for example, the Lassiter study or Lataster study that I did enter.
It will not be difficult, Senator. There's so many.
And again, listen, as I said, I'm well aware of the fact 5. I think I've given you a fair amount of time to respond and stuff, and I've tried to be
I'm
respectful.
used to talking a lot. It's okay.
We all are. It's an occupational hazard here, and we'll just prove it here, Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you. And I'll have to be quick because I have to actually go to the floor. I've just been at my other committee meeting. And I want to ask you a kind of yes or no question, Governor Green. HHS apparently is making plans to change the way that vaccines are approved, requiring placebo trials for vaccines that have been used previously for decades. In other words, the clinical trials on vaccines already in use will involve placebo trials. I understand a lot of doctors feel that this practice would be unethical. Do you agree?
Yes, that will be unethical.
Thank you.
And it will be unethical because we already have demonstration that people get protection. So it's unethical to give them a placebo and watch kids die of meningitis or diphtheria or polio. That's why it's unethical.
It's not unethical to study. It's not unethical to research. It's not unethical to run trials, but to possibly put people at risk when a particular vaccine has already been proven safe and effective and has been in use for decades, that would be unethical.
Correct, Senator.
Thank you. I want to ask Dr. McCullough, I understand that you are an executive of the Wellness Company, and that the Wellness Company has made money from the sale of supplements and other, quote, spike detox products. Is that correct?
I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of the Wellness Company, which is a national company started in 2022. It delivers healthcare. So it's a company of doctors. Also provides nutraceuticals and supplements, fully prescribes drugs across the range, health education materials.
How much money has your company made from the sale of spike detox products?
And the company has innovative products like spike detoxification based on peer-reviewed studies demonstrating the scientific underpinnings for a combined use of three over-the-counter nutraceuticals, which are nattokinase, bromelain, and curcumin. You can buy them anywhere on the internet if you want them. So the company, I don't have the company's balance sheet with me, but I can tell you its overall valuation right now is about $50 million with an M. And that pales in comparison to the tens of billions of dollars that the government spent on vaccines that have caused great harm. At the Wellness Company, we are trying to help the country recover, whereas further vaccination is putting the country into a big hole in terms of damaging their health care.
And your
Audience, please.
your company, that company also makes ivermectin? Ivermectin?
The company can prescribe, the doctors can prescribe ivermectin, they can prescribe Paxlovid, molnupiravir, they can prescribe any drug within the pharmacopoeia.
How much have been the profits from the sale of that drug since 2020?
Well, it's prescribed, so whatever pharmacy delivers it, like CVS or Walgreens, they would derive any
I'm
profit.
talking about profits for the company.
It can't, because they prescribe drugs to pharmacies. The pharmacies are the ones that people pay to get the
What
medication.
is do you have a personal share in the profits from the wellness company?
Yeah, I receive a set salary. I don't receive any % share of profits, and I have a very minor equity stake in the company. I work there part-time. I'm full-time in practice. I'm also the president of the McCullough Foundation.
But you do share in the revenue and profits.
I receive a set salary.
Let me ask you,
So that's
again,
it's an incorrect assertion. I get a set salary. I do not have any sharing of any revenue that comes in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay?
Has your board certification ever been revoked?
I resigned from the American Board of Internal Medicine November 11th of 2024 due to an ongoing dispute over the term you've used, misinformation. which is
So
a propaganda term. It's
your
a
board's-
leverage term. So I had a dispute. I resigned from them. Listen, I'm one of the most published people in the American Board of Internal Medicine. They rely on my research for a lot of their board materials.
So you're
And then-
you're no longer board certified.
I'm board certified by the National Association of Physicians and Surgeons. There's many different organizations that provide board certification.
Which one did you resign from?
The American Board of Internal Medicine, after 40 years of a perfect clinical track record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
A perfect example of the vilification of people that had a second opinion. By the way, it's always my understanding in medicine that if you had a serious health condition, you go seek a second opinion, because nobody has all the answers. Every human body is different, but you know, that was an unfortunate line of questioning. Mr. Siri, do you want to describe why it's appropriate for HHS Secretary Kennedy to actually do some research on vaccines? I'm quite sure, tell me if I'm wrong here, but when Mr. Kennedy pressed Fauci for the random control blind placebo trials on childhood vaccines, oh yeah, we've done all kinds of them. Couldn't produce one. I know in testimony, we've had other officials of the CDC or FDA ask the same question. They just can't come up with them. So can you set the record straight in terms of what studies have actually been done on the vaccines on the childhood schedule?
Absolutely. So in my 66-page submission, I set out every single routine childhood vaccine on the CDC schedule today with sources citing to the FDA underlying clinical trial documents that confirm. So if you dispute this term, you got to argue with the FDA. Not a single routine childhood vaccine on the current schedule, other than the Covaxin licensed for 12 and older, was licensed based on a clinical trial in which the control group received a placebo. And if the control group received another vaccine, that vaccine was also not licensed based on a placebo-controlled trial. That is all set forth in here. It is categorically accurate, a placebo meaning an inert
By the way,
substance.
do you want to just talk about some of the most egregious examples? One I found, and this is off of a blog, or I mean off of a podcast, so, but I'm assuming it's true because it hasn't been disputed. Apparently, the approval for the aluminum adjuvant in vaccines was done off of a trial with 4 rabbits. And
aluminum adjuvant
one of the rabbits died. They killed the other ones after 28 days and found all kinds of aluminum in the body, but they approved it. It said, good go. Is that true as well?
Aluminum adjuvants are not, they're used to induce autoimmunity in lab animals. They are part of the active ingredients. They're not separately approved as their own standalone product. Injecting a child with just aluminum adjuvant would be entirely unethical because it has no therapeutic value in and of itself, unless you want to treat them like a lab animal.
I'm
to
not
induce
suggesting do
autoimmunity.
that. I'm just saying, but that's what it was approved for use in vaccines. Is
As far as I'm aware, actually, it's never been approved, aluminum adjuvant standing alone.
oh, okay.
And I'm not aware of any such approval. But to answer your question, why look at the safety of of childhood vaccines? And the answer, I think, is this: we should be looking at all environmental insults, because we are in the midst right now of a pandemic. There's been a lot of talk. We got to be ready for the next pandemic. We have a pandemic right now. It's a pandemic of chronic disease amongst our children. Over 50% of kids in America have a chronic disease right now. That's up from under 13% in the early 80s. What's changed? What has caused massive immune dysregulation to occur amongst our children? Why do I say that? Because most of the chronic diseases that we've seen exploding, asthma, you go down the list, have an etiology in being a form of immune dysregulation. Not and I've set that forth in my submission as well. So you have an explosion in chronic disease since the early 80s. Most of those chronic diseases are a form of immune dysregulation. What has changed in terms of might be causing the immune systems of our children in mass to go haywire? Well, maybe we should start by ruling out the fact that we have gone from 3 injections on the CDC schedule in 1986, the year the National Child Vaccine Draft was passed, to currently, if a child gets the full CDC schedule, follows it today, by 1 year of age, gets 29 injections, including in utero, okay? 3 to 29. And every one of those vaccines, as I mentioned earlier, was clinical trialed and licensed by a company knowing they would not be liable for design defect claims. We need to study that,
So maybe
like
you ought to,
everything else.
study that. Okay, I think we've probably gone about as far as we're going to go today. What I am going to do is give each one of you, and we'll end with the governor. You can have the last word. Well, I'll probably have the last word. But give you each, and I really respect it, not much more than a minute. If there's just something non-itchy point you want to make, can you make it in a minute? And we'll start with you, Dr. McCullough.
You've asked for us to cite evidence. 3 papers by Nathaniel Mead, who's in the audience today, a former National Institutes of Health writer, 3 of them that contain nearly 1,000 references, so they're all there in these papers, have concluded that the risks of COVID-19 vaccination far outweigh any theoretical benefits. We've heard countless wishful thoughts from Senator Blumenthal and from Governor Green, Dr. Green, but they're wishful. They wish the vaccines would have saved lives. They wish the vaccines would have reduced severity. I can tell you, because you know this, I was one of the few doctors who was on the real front lines of treating acutely sick patients at home. That's how we reduced risk of death, not via a vaccine. The marathon runner, he passed away because he didn't receive effective early multi-drug treatment. It didn't matter whether he took a vaccine or not. Our CDC knew about thousands of patients fully vaccinated early in 2021 dying of acute COVID-19. It was abundantly obvious the COVID-19 vaccines did not reduce the risk of death. I don't want America to be fooled by this hearing today, thinking that the vaccines save lives, because they didn't.
Dr. Vaughn, please, audience, please. Dr. Vaughn.
So I challenge physicians to really return to the 2 C's of medicine, which is care about the person, the actual human being in front of you, and actually be curious about why they're there and why they seek help, not tell them that it's all in their head and there's nothing you can do. And nothing I have read has said that your problems are problems that I can do anything about. Instead, especially when we look at vaccine injury and long COVID, we're talking about 10 to 15 million people that are suffering, and we have a medical community that doesn't know how to help them. We have to study it, and we have to get back to caring about our patients and being curious about what their ailments are.
By the way, real quick question, because I meant to ask this. You hear long COVID, you hear vaccine injury. You know, kind of my assumption is most doctors look at a vaccine injury, call it long COVID. You know, what do you think the breakdown is? Because long COVID exists, right? I mean, that spike protein's a nasty thing.
And so just again, I think one of the biggest things is, at least in the 4,000 patients I've seen, about 80% of them have been vaccinated. 20% have not. And so long COVID does not equally mean that you have had to be vaccinated. There's plenty of people that didn't get vaccinated that have long COVID. But the problem currently in the way the studies are done is they are not disambiguating that data. And it needs to be collected, and we need to study it.
Okay, Dr. Thorp.
Thank you. I'm an extremely busy clinician, 45 years, okay? When I just in the past, in my tenure, 4.5 years, while I was working through the pandemic with SSM Health, 4.5 years, I saw 27,500 high-risk pregnant patients. I was extraordinarily busy. I published extensively during that time on the government data based on Pfizer's data. I gave it to my chain of command. Never once did they treat it as science. Never once did they allow me to present in grand rounds. And after I presented under your last testimony in 2022, I was fired from SSM Health because I brought it to their attention. It was never discussed at a department meeting or at a division meeting or at a grand rounds. That's not science.
That's corruption. Dr. Walscog.
Thank you. I'd just like to review a little bit about some of my frustration with regards to continually hearing how vaccine injury is rare. So just for a second, let's all look at big numbers. There's over 17 billion doses of COVID vaccines given worldwide. The Freeman study shows and again, this is just for serious adverse events, ones of special interest, 1 in 800. That's 1/8 of 1%. Multiply those two numbers, and you have about 22 million adverse events to COVID shots worldwide. Multiply that by 4.34%, which is about our U.S. population as compared to the rest of the world. That's over 900,000 serious adverse events to COVID shots here in the United States. And I think it's time to recognize these people, to research them, to provide them care, which they are not getting, and to consider getting them, and really getting them fair and just compensation. Thank you.
I think it's well past time. Mr. Siri.
I'm just going to quickly correct the record on a few things I've heard here today, if that's okay. First is that most vaccines, including most childhood vaccines required for school, do not prevent transmission. They're just personal protection, like pertussis vaccine, activated polio vaccine. And I've heard a lot about COVID vaccine. COVID vaccine does not prevent transmission, which makes a lot of what was discussed here today, when you put it in that light, doesn't make much sense. And if it does reduce symptoms, it actually makes you more likely to transmit, because if you don't have as much symptoms and you're still transmitting, you're less likely to stay away from other people. I also heard people talk about what the FDA's new guidance is. They're no longer going to give COVID vaccines to those who are in low-risk groups. That's not what the FDA said. Read it. What they said was that they're going to require proper clinical trials for those in low-risk groups, as they should. And I don't understand why there was so much talk about being opposed to this new FDA guidance. Why do we oppose gold standard science? Also, in all this discussion about deaths from COVID-19 vaccine, since we're going to rely on clinical trials, let's look at what happened in the clinical trial for the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. 21 people died who got the vaccine. 17 died in the placebo group. That's what happened in the clinical trial. And if we're going to then look at all-cause mortality, those match up pretty good, okay? The FDA, when it came to getting 95% effective, remember that at 8 people in the placebo group had symptoms, 162 in the vaccine group had symptoms, putting aside there were another 3,000 that weren't tested that had symptoms. They used that statistical comparison to get their 95% figure. They should have done the same thing for deaths, but they didn't, because it doesn't fit their approach to get this product on the market. And so they let Pfizer explain away all the deaths, even though there were probably almost twice as many deaths of COVID, of cardiac related. Also, you got to ask yourself, it's been 4 years that they're telling us the COVID vaccine is safe. So if it's safe, why do they still need immunity? Why does the manufacturer of this product still need immunity? All you'd have to do is 2 things to not get sued, just like you do with drugs. 1, make it as safe as technologically possible, and 2, disclose the risks. Then you can't sue for design defect claims, and you can't sue for failure to warn. Why don't they just lift the immunity, let them make it as safe as they can, and disclose the risk? Even drugs given to small populations can exist and make a profit, because they do those 2 things. And why, after 40 years of childhood vaccines, can they not lift the immunity for a lot of them? Why? You got to ask yourself that question, because they don't either want to make them safer, because for whatever reason, or they don't want to disclose the real risks.
Okay, Mr. Siri, I got to, okay.
I 3 quick more?
No, I've got to move on.
I got it, okay.
Governor Green.
Okay, thank you for having me, Senator. A couple of things. I feel strongly about this. I feel strongly that vaccines save lives. I also acknowledge people who have different beliefs. I will say that a lot was said about being civil and kind to people who have disputed positions. Just so you know, one of the gentlemen who is on the panel today had their organization send out a hit piece on me back in my own home state. It was a very unusual thing as I came to testify in good faith, talking about my response, but also talking about the things that have nothing to do with COVID, talking about how I am as a governor. So there is an ugliness out there that we all are going to have to navigate, and I want to acknowledge that. I will tell you that I oversaw a public health mission which resulted in a 90% vaccination rate, which is quite extraordinary for this circumstance. And for our state, which was a closed system, we did very well. We had, and I will bring you, probably to your dismay, a truckload of data and paper and information, and it will be compelling. So hopefully that will be considered by those who have different opinions. And I will consider their different opinions. But I will tell you this, I will caution everyone that as we go down the rabbit hole of possibly moving away from vaccinations or vaccination programs, be very careful what you wish for, because as a physician who is still practicing, as a person who has spent many, many years practicing for the public health service, mind you, we will be in dire straits if we walk away from vaccinations and science. And the last thing I will tell you is I sat in, I believe it was this room, or it was a similar room for sure, listening to the Secretary of Health and Human Services prior to his swearing in talk about how he wouldn't even walk away from his professional life and his profits based on the work he's doing. And I'm not trying to demonize him, because as I've shared with you, I believe in some of the things that he supports. But when I hear from colleagues, people who are testifying about immunity, they have interests, and those interests should be walked away from. If anyone's going to try to influence you, walk away from your interests, walk away from your vested positions. Be truth tellers, perhaps. Be part of the public health solution, but do not suggest that you are not compromised as you suggest others are compromised. We should fight for equality, and we should fight for that kind of standard on both sides. That I recognize from the fellow testifiers, but there has been quite a lot of hypocrisy. And because I'm one of 6 and had to face some somewhat, let's just say, caustic moments, I don't want to complain. I just want to say the future of healthcare is going to be for us to come together, not demonize one another. And we can talk further about that privately. Thank you, sir.
Well, I regret caustic moments. I regret any kind of attacks. Don't support that at all. But I also don't like being accused of walking away from science. I mean, we're trying to restore integrity of science. I think it's indisputable it's been corrupted in many cases. So I want everybody at the table, okay? And we'll take a look at our next hearing in terms of how we maybe create a little more balance here. But regardless, I do want to close and conclude that I know, as I said earlier, there's a lot of anticipation for this hearing. You know, I appreciate that. But I also want to caution everybody, this is going to be a slog. This isn't going to be some one hearing or one piece of information or one study that, okay, this side proved they're right or the other side. You know, science isn't like that. To me, the best definition of science is skepticism. Now, skepticism hasn't been allowed. I mean, that'd be my point, Governor. We haven't been able to ask these questions. Those who do are vilified. Their careers are destroyed. Their licenses are pulled. Their accreditation is gone. Because you do have a cartel. It exists, okay? I think it's undeniable. So, again, we're the little people in this debate and argument. You know, the side, you know, the other side has all the dollars. They've got the media. They've got the bullhorn, all that kind of stuff. These are the little people here. They're being crushed by it. They've been crushed by it. But they've stood tall, and I appreciate that fact. But that being said, I'm not buying, you know, I don't just blindly say, okay, you said that, so that's what it is. I'm asking all of them, all of you, provide the science, be willing to debate. I'm hoping on my next hearing, because we did this in my events, we always invited the federal health officials. Okay, now probably need to get the federal health officials from the Biden administration. They're the ones kind of responsible for a lot of that. Come forward. I'll give them an open forum. I'll give them, you know, equal access. The executives from Pfizer and Moderna, come on forward, defend yourself, okay? Engage in the scientific debate. They have been willing to do that in the past. They hid things. You've had to, you know, not only FOIA, but then sue under FOIA to get the information. That's, again, so there's a history here. There's a reality of what's happened. If there's frustration, a little hard feelings, you think you see it bubbling out. But again, put yourself in the shoes of the vaccine injured, who have seen their groups shut down by Facebook, who have got the emails from the families or the final suicide note for one of those people. There are people in this room that have gotten that suicide note. And they're still not acknowledged. They're still being gaslit. They're still being vilified. So that's the reality of the situation. I ran for a third term because nobody was advocating for the vaccine injured. And I apologize for not having, no. I apologize up front for not having a hearing earlier, but it takes time to get this information. And again, we only had a little bit, which allowed, you know, Senator Blumenthal to pick apart the evidence. And I didn't say we made the full case. You know, I've got indication we can make a pretty full case over the next at least 2 years during this chairmanship. So that's what I'm dedicated to doing. Stay tuned. There's going to be more to come. God bless all of you. By the way, got to do the record for this hearing will remain open for 15 days until Thursday, June 5th, 2025 at 5 p.m. That's when you submit all these studies. For the submission of statements and questions for the record, this hearing is adjourned.